After Tauti reached the sage tier, he had developed feelings for this plate, thus he couldn't just watch Lin Ming blow this place up. You just broke through to tier 10? Tauti turned into his human form again and asked. Yes. Lin Ming nodded. There was nothing to hide. You're very strong, Tauti could not help but say. Although Lin Ming was a tier 10, he could probably kill a tier 10 magical beast instantly. Just now, he had agreed to Lin Ming's request because Lin Ming had the longevity monument in his hand, and had obtained the God of Fire's inheritance. Otherwise, he would have just killed Lin Ming. After all, if he didn't, he would not be one of the 4 great fierce beasts. He didn't expect that Lin Ming would give him such a surprise. Tauti was glad that he didn't directly attack just now. Although he wasn't afraid of Lin Ming's growth value was too high. You are Lin Ming. Suddenly, Tauti stepped forward and couldn't help but speak. Yes. Lin Ming nodded. How do you know me? Lin Ming was very curious as to why Tauti could directly call his name. After all, Tauti had never appeared in the world. Of course I know you. I thought that it was an exaggeration to say that you could break through the sage tier and reach the god tier. As expected, one look is worth 1,000 words. I realized my short-sighted view after I met you today. I believe that you will definitely be able to rebuild this connection. Tauti laughed loudly. Do you know my grandmaster? After hearing Tauti's words, Lin Ming knew that it was Gandalf who had told Tauti about him. It's not just Gandalf. After reaching the sage tier, we are all connected. That old fellow on the dung plate knows about you as well, Tauti said. Your appearance has changed. The reason why Tauti hadn't recognized Lin Ming immediately was that Lin Ming's appearance and aura had changed greatly. The current Lin Ming's eyes were red, and his appearance was different. On top of that, without the concealment by the Demon King, Lin Ming's aura had also changed. Plus his fire magic power had undergone a qualitative change. I've changed? Lin Ming rubbed his head and asked. Yes, you have become more handsome. Tauti laughed again. Thank you for your praise, Senior. Lin Ming couldn't help but laugh. You have gained so much. Are you still going to the Q plate? Tauti asked Lin Ming. Yes, the whole purpose of my trip was to go to the Q plate. Lin Ming nodded and said. Oh? What you gained here can't satisfy you. Looking at Lin Ming, Tauti couldn't help but sigh. The inheritance of the God of Fire had been right under his nose, but Tauti could never get his hands on it, even after such a long time. Lin Ming had just arrived and got the inheritance quicker than Tauti could come to his sense, but he didn't seem to care at all. He didn't seem to be delighted at all. Take care. I won't send you off. Tauti made a please go on your way gesture. Senior, since we've met, are you not going to give me something? Lin Ming asked Tauti. A gift? What gift? Tauti. When Tauti heard that Lin Ming wanted a gift from him, he started to chatter. However, he quickly shut his mouth. He suddenly remembered that the few human sage tier experts had given Lin Ming 2 spiritual weapons that were at the highest tier. They had promised him all sorts of benefits as well. Regardless of all else, he was a sage tier expert. Now that he had met Lin Ming, he had to give some kind of gift. Forget it. What do you want? Say it. Tauti sighed and said. If he had known earlier that this would happen, he would not have come. Not only had he been forced back into his original form by Lin Ming's attack, but he also had to give Lin Ming a gift now. I say, kid, you have 2 divine artifacts, the Wheel of Wrath and the Stupa. Now you've also obtained the inheritance of the God of Fire as well as the longevity monument. I advise you not to be too greedy. Before Lin Ming could speak, Tauti spoke and gave Lin Ming a precaution. Senior, I don't want your things. I just want you to do me a favor, Lin Ming chuckled. Right now, no matter what spiritual treasure or pill it was, it couldn't tempt Lin Ming at all. What favor? Let me tell you, I'm a very kind person. I don't commit murder or arson, Tauti said. I just want you to give me dozens of tier 10 magical beasts. Lin Ming chuckled and said. It was not too much for the master of this place to give him some tier 10 magical beasts, right? Lin Ming still maintained his original dream of building his army of magical beasts. Dozens of tier 10 magical beasts. Are you dreaming? There are only a few over 10 tier 10 magical beasts in the entire Xia plate. After hearing Lin Ming's words, the originally calm Tauti suddenly became hysterical. Please calm down. Please calm down. Let's discuss this slowly. I haven't decided on the number yet, right? Lin Ming quickly spoke and calmed down Tauti. It's impossible for me to gift you dozens of tier 10 magical beasts. On this plate, there are only a total of 16 tier 10 magical beasts, Tauti said. Just a dozen tier 10 magical beasts? Lin Ming questioned with some doubt. Just a dozen? How many tier 10 experts does an empire have? There's only such a number on this plate. How many more do you want me to have? Hearing Lin Ming's words, Touty became even angrier. Okay, please calm down. Is it okay if I take them all away? Lin Ming hurriedly waved his hand and said, You brat, how greedy can you be? I only have so many tier 10 magical beasts here, and you want to take them all away? Hearing Lin Ming's words, Touty became even angrier. Senior, look at you. You're always so impatient. Lin Ming once again calmed Touty's emotions. Fine. Remember, you asked for so many tier 10 magical beasts from me. When you go to the queue and dung plate, you can't ask for less from them than what you asked for from me. Touty gave up on the struggle. After all, he had just experienced Lin Ming's genius. Thus, even if he had to suffer monetarily, he still had to be on good terms with Lin Ming. Yes, senior. I understand. When I meet the other two seniors, I will praise your magnanimity. Lin Ming nodded and said, Get lost. Touty was so angry that he laughed. There is no need to let the nine-headed worm control them. If you do that, those magical beasts will be too pitiful. I will just warn them. After all, they already have wisdom, Touty said. Yes, senior is so thoughtful, Lin Ming nodded. Come. A huge black hole appeared behind Touty's body. Within the black hole, 15 tier 10 magical beasts appeared in an orderly fashion. Senior, why are there only 15 tier 10 magical beasts? Didn't you say there were 16 of them? Lin Ming asked innocently. Damn it, what's that behind you? Touty said coldly. This guy, if he could, he really wanted to beat him up. Yes, senior, I forgot about it, Lin Ming smiled. He had forgotten that he had let the nine-headed worm control a tier 10 magical beast at the beginning. Nine-headed worm, release your control over this magical beast, Lin Ming said to the nine-headed worm. Yes, the nine-headed worm did as told. You guys, listen to my command. Touty gave instructions to the 16 tier 10 magical beasts. All the magical beasts expressed their submission. Senior, I won't mistreat them, Lin Ming said. Gandalf, Lin Ming then called out. Yes, master. Gandalf understood what Lin Ming meant, and directly placed all the tier 10 magical beasts into the stupa. Goodbye, senior, Lin Ming waved his hand as he said. Wait, I'll give you another gift. Seeing Lin Ming was just about to leave, Touty quickly said. There's no need, senior, Lin Ming waved his hand. I've already got quite a lot from you, Lin Ming chuckled. I'll send you away, 1,000 miles away. Touty was so angry that he directly swallowed Lin Ming with a black hole. Lin Ming didn't resist because he knew that no matter how angry Touty was, he wouldn't really attack him. Buzz! The black hole disappeared, and before Lin Ming realized it, he found himself in the Q plate. At this time, in the Zia plate. Damn it, if I knew this would have happened, I wouldn't have come out this time. This is too much, Touty said angrily. But I've seen enough. It's not for nothing, right? Touty sighed and directly disappeared on the spot. In the Q plate, Lin Ming had expected Touty to do this. Touty was probably worried that he would continue to plunder across the Zia plate. Whoosh! 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 Just as Lin Ming was thinking, many tentacles suddenly tied Lin Ming up. Tisk. Plant-type magical beasts are very good too. Lin Ming nodded. Plant-type magical beasts were more flexible and their attack methods were more unpredictable. Although plant-type magical beasts grew slower in tiers, among those of the same tier, under normal circumstances, plant-type magical beasts were more powerful. After all, it was harder to deal with. A tier 8 magical beast dares to attack me? Lin Ming snorted and all of the tentacles turned into thin air. This was the strength of Lin Ming's current fire magic. It could be said that the tentacles didn't even have the chance to turn into ashes. They were directly evaporated. This plant-type magical beast sensed the terrifying danger Lin Ming would bring and immediately fled. Lin Ming couldn't be bothered to attack a magical beast of this tier. In addition, Lin Ming was in a good mood today, so he spared the beast's life. Origin of life. On his trip to Mountain Wookiee, the nine-headed worm was obtained by chance, and although he had planned to obtain the inheritance of the god of fire, it was not his ultimate goal. His ultimate goal for coming to Mountain Wookiee was for the origin of life. Before the demon god had disappeared, he had told Lin Ming the way to break through to the sage tier. One of the things required was the origin of life. Only by following the demon god's instructions could Lin Ming clear the path after breaking through to the sage tier. If he were to use the origin of life during his breakthrough, It would bring many benefits to Lin Ming. It could be said that if he did use the origin of life during breakthrough, Lin Ming could become practically immortal. Not only would his lifespan far exceed that of the sage tier creatures, but he could also quickly recover from injuries in battle. A tier 10 plant-type magical beast. Lin Ming looked at a moving plant-type magical beast and said excitedly. His other goal in coming here was to get more tier 10 magical beasts too. You want to run? Lin Ming jumped and began to beat up this tier 10 magical beast. As for the tier 10 magical beast, it felt very wronged. Thinking about it, it didn't do anything wrong. It didn't even take the initiative to provoke Lin Ming, but was beaten up just like that. Do you admit defeat? Lin Ming asked. Yes. Yes. This plant-type magical beast didn't have the power to resist at all. If Lin Ming exploded with power, he would be able to instantly kill him. Okay. Lin Ming nodded and directly put him into the stupa. Kid, you came here to cause trouble again? Suddenly, a voice sounded beside Lin Ming. The owner of this voice was the sage tier expert of the Q plate, Senior Rattan God. Lin Ming hurriedly lowered his head and bowed. I have 15 plant-type tier 10 magical beasts here. I'll give them to you. Go to the Dong plate instead, Rattan God spoke directly. Lin Ming didn't expect that he would directly start to chase him away. No. Senior, I came here for other things. Lin Ming hurriedly waved his hand and said, 15 isn't enough. That kid Touty only has 16 tier 10 magical beasts, right? Hearing Lin Ming's refusal, Rattan God frowned. All right, I'll add another one for you. Rattan God said magnanimously. Senior, do you know the origin of life? Lin Ming asked. The origin of life? Of course I do. However, it has been sealed by a god tier expert. I'm afraid you won't be able to obtain it, Rattan God said. It's fine. Senior, please just bring me to that place. I have my ways, Lin Ming said. Very well, Rattan God nodded. The origin of life might sound like it was filled with life force, but the Q plate did not rely on it at all. Rather, if the origin of life wasn't sealed, it would probably turn the whole Q plate into a wasteland. Just like what people often said, if one wanted to go to heaven, one had to go to hell first. This origin of life itself was actually the power that exhausted the most energy. Since you have a way to remove the seal on the origin of life, I wonder if you can take it away? Rattan God asked. Yes, of course, I'll take it away, Lin Ming nodded. He would fuse the origin of life itself for his personal use, and after he did that, wouldn't it be considered taking it away as well? Very well, follow me. Rattan God nodded and directly brought Lin Ming to a dark place. This place was several hundred meters underground. The origin of life is in the seal in front of us, Rattan God said. Thank you, Senior, Lin Ming nodded and said. Remember, you must bring it away with you, or else this plate of mine will probably dry up. Rattan God spoke and instructed Lin Ming again. Yes, I understand, Lin Ming nodded. Lin Ming didn't know why Rattan God was so fearful of the origin of life, and why, under such circumstances, he still agreed to bring him to the place. I'm off, Rattan God said and disappeared on the spot. Lin Ming approached the origin of life. Thump, thump, thump. As Lin Ming approached, the sound of a strong heartbeat filled Lin Ming's ears. Disease? Lin Ming raised his head and looked at everything before him. This origin of life was a spitting image of a heart. Lin Ming moved forward and touched it with his hand. However, his palm was directly bounced back. The seal here was too strong. This was a god tier seal. The current Lin Ming couldn't break it at all. Senior Demon God, I won't be able to sense your aura in the future, Lin Ming sighed and said with great reluctance. He opened his palm and looked at the key in his hand. The key was formed from the final power of the demon god. Go, Lin Ming said as he hurled the key. As the key landed, the seal on the origin of life was instantly broken. Buzz. The second the seal was broken, the surrounding life force was crazily absorbed. The surrounding land instantly lost its color. Lin Ming strode forward and stretched out his palm, wanting to take away the origin of life. However, as soon as Lin Ming's palm touched the origin of life, it turned into a withered palm. His flesh and blood had instantly withered. So eerie. Lin Ming frowned. I can't care about all this now. I have to do what I promised Rattan God, Lin Ming said and firmly gripped the origin of life. Rattan God! Lin Ming shouted. As soon as Lin Ming said those words, Rattan God and Touty appeared behind Lin Ming. Touty released a black hole that surrounded Lin Ming. As for Lin Ming, he instantly disappeared on the spot. I didn't expect him to break the god tier seal in an instant. Rattan God looked at the spot where the origin of life had been and felt a sense of loss. Although he had been unable to take the origin of life for his personal use and was extremely wary of it, he knew of the benefits if he could. The Zia plate's inheritance of the god of fire, as well as the longevity monument, were taken away by him. The origin of life you have here is nothing, Tauti sighed and said. Only a monstrous genius like him can lead us to break through the sage tier and destroy the barrier, Tauti said. That's true, Rattan God nodded. After meeting Lin Ming, his thoughts were exactly the same as Tauti's. One look is worth 1,000 words. If he can take the origin of life for his personal use, his later achievements will be even more immeasurable. After all, that is the heart of a god, Tauti said enviously. Yes, the heart of a god. The benefits are immeasurable. Rattan God nodded and agreed. At this moment, after being engulfed in the black hole, Lin Ming found himself outside Mountain Wookiee. In the area where he was, there wasn't a single person within a radius of several hundred miles. At this moment, Lin Ming's palm that was holding onto the origin of life had already dried up. The bones in his arm had already begun to decay. Furthermore, it was certain that compared to Lin Ming, even a sage tier expert wouldn't have a better time holding on to the origin of life. On the contrary, it could be even worse. Lin Ming had it slightly better thanks to the percentage of god tier origin energy in his body. At the very least, he wouldn't be reduced to dust in the face of this corrosion. If it were any other expert below the sage tier, they would probably be reduced to dust the moment they came into contact with the origin of life. Who? Lin Ming exhaled. He swapped hands to hold the origin of life. Then he used the power of energy and blood to instantly repair his corroded palm. Forget it. Let's just fuse it. Lin Ming snorted coldly and said. Under such circumstances, if he continued the cycle, the power of energy and blood in Lin Ming would only be wasted. The origin of life couldn't be satisfied at all. At this moment, it would be better to just subdue it. Of course, Lin Ming's method was also extremely risky. After all, this was the origin of life that would cause one's hand to rot if placed in one's palm. To fuse it directly into one's body, one could imagine how dangerous it would be. But Lin Ming couldn't care less about all this anymore. He directly fused the origin of life into his body. This was because no matter the consequences, Lin Ming couldn't give up on the origin of life. The benefits of the origin of life would be apparent after one reached the sage tier. It was also necessary to break the path that had been blocked. Fuse! Lin Ming shouted. The moment his chest came into contact with the origin of life, it instantly decayed. Ding! The system has detected God's heart. Do you want to fuse it? The system's voice appeared at this moment. Yes. Lin Ming nodded. His voice was filled with great pain. Ding! The system has injected a new life force into God's heart and removed all impurities from it. The fusion has begun. The system's voice appeared once again. Lin Ming's body was instantly surrounded by a mysterious and unfathomable force. In this world, everyone thought that this heart belonged to a god-tier powerhouse. However, they had never thought of the fact that only clones of the god-tier experts were left in the world. How could their hearts remain for a few 100,000 years? The origin of life belonged to the world tree. This was why Q Plate was filled with plant-type magical beasts. Right now, Q Plate's Rattan God was just a vine of the world tree. A mere vine could transform into a sage tier expert. This proved how terrifying the world tree was. Fuse. What was left of Lin Ming's body was a skeleton. The origin of life had transformed into the size of Lin Ming's heart and landed on the left side of Lin Ming's chest. At this moment, Lin Ming hadn't completed the fusion. The human body had many blood vessels and meridians. Right now, this heart had only landed on the left side of his chest. It had yet to truly fuse. At this moment, Lin Ming's blood vessels and meridians had all decayed. Even if Lin Ming wanted to convey his pain, he couldn't shout even if he wanted to, as his tongue had been completely corroded at this point. It could be said that the current Lin Ming was only a skeleton. There was nothing left of him, including his hair, nails, and so on. However, Lin Ming wasn't feeling any pain at this moment. Although he was only left with a skeleton, he could feel a kind of life force beating within his body. Lin Ming could hear the beating of his heart within the skeleton, and this heart was beating against his bones. At the moment, Lin Ming didn't even have eyes. Lin Ming could clearly feel the strong heartbeat. At this moment, Lin Ming's skeleton began to crumble. In the end, even his skeleton disappeared on the spot. It had crumbled into powder. At this moment, on Q plate of Mountain Wookiee, Lin Ming's aura has disappeared. Rattan God frowned and said, "This means that Lin Ming." Taudi's brows were tightly knitted as well. The prodigy of this generation had disappeared just like that. Lin Ming had just obtained the inheritance of the god of fire though. Didn't the two of you notice that the aura of the origin of life has also disappeared? A voice abruptly sounded. It was the sage tier expert of Dong Plate. Humph, don't act like you're the only knowledgeable one. At this moment, another languid female voice rang out. The owner of this voice was the sage tier expert from Chun Plate. Just how terrifying was Mountain Wookiee? Not only did it have many powerful magical beasts and poisonous insects, but it also had sage tier experts on each plate. On top of that, the area of Mountain Wookiee was far too big compared to the Empire. Yet this wasn't even the secret of Mountain Wookiee. It could be said that if the inhabitants of Mountain Wookiee weren't willing to be sealed, it would probably be very difficult for the sage tier experts outside to seal them. These 4 sage tier experts each specialized in an area of expertise, all at the pinnacle of their respective domains. Chun Plate's sage tier expert was extremely proficient in the art of controlling poisonous insects. She could even control sage tier experts with her poisonous insects. As for Taudi, as soon as he reached the god tier, he would be one of the 4 great ancient fierce beasts. Even if he was at the sage tier, he could devour an entire world. Rattan God was a part of the world tree, thus he had powerful vitality and combat strength. Dong King, who was from the Dong Plate, was the first among the 4 to have become a sage, and thus possessed even more mysterious and unfathomable power. If one wants to go to heaven, one has to go to hell first. This was the meaning of the existence of the origin of life. None of you dare to try, but Lin Ming did. Don't you feel ashamed? Gunyang spoke. Tisk, you speak as if you dare. Dong King snorted. If not for her looks, he would have beaten her up. Humph. Gunyang snorted and turned her head. Lin Ming's aura has appeared again. Taudi had been paying attention to Lin Ming's aura and interrupted their argument. The aura of the origin of life too. Rattan God added. Let's go. The 4 of them disappeared from where they were and appeared beside Lin Ming. Of course, they weren't willing to get too close due to the crazy devouring ability of the origin of life. Lin Ming's skeleton began to slowly reconstruct itself. Lin Ming's bones seemed to be fused by one element after another. When Lin Ming's skeleton fully appeared, numerous tender buds were born on the surface of his bones. The tender buds soon merged into Lin Ming's bones, making Lin Ming's skeleton full of luster. Of course, the benefits that this brought to Lin Ming were not only on looks. There were countless other benefits bestowed on Lin Ming, the biggest of which was life force. Originally, within Lin Ming's body was a well of the power of energy and blood. Now, after it had all been absorbed by the origin of life, it turned into an endless life force that was supporting Lin Ming. It could be said that even if others had the system, they wouldn't be able to completely fuse with the origin of a world without a wealth of the power of energy and blood like Lin Ming. Even if they succeeded in fusing the origin of life, they wouldn't obtain endless life force. Erg. Lin Ming felt an indescribable itch on his body, causing him to start taking deep breaths. Although Lin Ming's organs hadn't been born yet, Lin Ming possessed all of his senses. Buzz. The endless power of energy and blood transformed into an endless life force. Although his energy and blood had changed, Lin Ming's physical strength had become even stronger. Furthermore, Lin Ming had always been tempering his body in the past, but this time his body was remodeled. His physical body now could be said to be many times stronger than before. Thanks to the remodeling, Lin Ming's bones had become the epitome of perfect. Furthermore, because Lin Ming had advanced tiers too quickly, his strength was too strong and he had tempered his body too many times. Thus there were still some impurities in Lin Ming's body that he didn't have time to expel. Right now, his body was extremely pure. And one thing was certain, Lin Ming's body would always stay extremely pure. The heart of the world tree was the origin of life. Even the most ordinary tree could purify, let alone the god's heart, which was also known as the origin of life. This kid is really enviable. Taudi couldn't help but speak. Speaking of which, you dare to devour anything, why didn't you dare to devour the origin of life? If you did, the one who might break the barrier would be you. Gunyang spoke. There was a hint of mockery in her tone, but it was filled with more sincerity. Tisk tisk, you can't say that. This is fate. Taudi waved his hand and said, I am, after all, at the sage tier and have very strong senses and premonitions. If I were to devour the origin of life, I'm afraid I won't be the one to break the barrier. Instead, I'll be a pile of dried ash. Towdy said. Even if it were you, it would be the same. Towdy looked at Gun Yang and added, You're right. The four of us won't be able to withstand God's heart. The person who can break through that barrier isn't us or those old geezers outside. It's him, and it can only be him. This is also the reason why no one has broken through past the sage tier for hundreds of thousands of years. This is also the reason why only when he appears will there be a chance for all of us to break through to the God tier. Perhaps after the God tier there will be a wider world. However, we probably won't be able to see it, but he will be able to see it. Dong King spoke. As the most experienced sage tier expert, it was a given he could see through the essence of things. If we can break through to the God tier, it will be enough for us to be thankful to the heavens. Rattan God spoke as well. The four of them could be said to be extremely powerful within the sage tier as they were at the peak. This meant that if the barrier was broken, they would be the first to see the sceneries of the God tier. At this moment, Lin Ming's body had completely been resculpted. Even if Lin Ming's hair had become more resilient and denser. This is the legendary rebirth from Nirvana, right? Gun Yang said enviously. Although it is not as good as the true legendary rebirth from Nirvana, it is still extremely enviable, Towdy said. It's not like that. You don't understand, Dong King said from the side. Why do you think that what Lin Ming is experiencing now is not the real rebirth from Nirvana? Dong King asked Towdy. Because Lin Ming's current tier is too low, Towdy said matter-of-factly. This was what he thought. Furthermore, Towdy believed that if Lin Ming did this after he reached the sage tier, the power he would gain after Nirvana would be even more powerful. You don't understand. The earlier one goes through Nirvana, the lower the tier of the person who goes through Nirvana is, the more benefits it will bring to oneself, and the more one can gain, Dong King said. It's just that low-tier mages and the other occupations don't have the ability to go through Nirvana. Of course, Lin Ming is an exception. Dong King looked at Lin Ming and said, although he didn't show too much emotion, his envy for Lin Ming was very strong. Now that Lin Ming has been rebirthed from Nirvana, the impurities and flaws in his body have been largely eliminated. Therefore, there will be very little resistance to his future advances and breakthroughs. Added with Lin Ming's current foundation, I'm afraid there won't be any resistance or pressure for him to break through to the sage tier. If one thought about it, everyone and anyone would find it extremely difficult to break through to the sage tier. This was also why there were so many tier 10 experts, but there were only a dozen sage tier experts in this world. Breaking through to the sage tier was too difficult. In general, the earlier the Nirvana, the more benefits one will gain, Dong King said. I'm really envious at this moment, Gun Yang couldn't help but say. Tisk tisk, you're so good at seducing people. Why don't you just be Lin Ming's mistress? In the future, if Lin Ming breaks through that barrier, you'll have the most benefits. Towdy, who was not on good terms with the Gun Yang, immediately spoke. Sure, why not? How about I give Lin Ming a son and a daughter too? Gun Yang had lived for so long, she was not embarrassed to say such words. However, when she said this she couldn't help but glance at Lin Ming. Lin Ming was completely naked. He was already perfect before Nirvana, and now that his body had been reconstructed, it was needless to say how perfect he was now. Lin Ming was like a dazzling light. With just a glance, he pierced into her chest. Gun Yang was joking just now, but she couldn't deny that her breathing suddenly quickened now. Tisk tisk, why are you blushing? How can someone like him take a fancy to an old thing like you? Seeing Gun Yang's strange behavior, Rattan God couldn't help but mock her. My lifespan is much longer than a human's. How am I old? I'm still in my prime. Gun Yang snorted coldly and stopped communicating with them. Rumble. Lin Ming's body was now fully grown. After Lin Ming stood up, he heard a thunder-like rumbling sound in his body. Pooh! Lin Ming let out a breath, and after he let out this breath, a withered tree beside Lin Ming immediately recovered to life. This was the current Lin Ming. The life force in his body was so terrifying that even a breath could revive all living things. Seniors. Lin Ming looked at the four people guarding beside him and cupped his fists. Put on some clothes, or else someone will be aroused, Rattan God reminded. Yes. At this moment, Lin Ming had just realized that he was naked. He glanced at himself and hurriedly took out a piece of clothing from his interspatial ring. Even Lin Ming's strong body had been corroded by the corrosive power just now, let alone the clothes on Lin Ming's body. Bullshit. I have slept with countless people. Gun Yang naturally knew that Rattan God was talking about her. However, even though she was saying such words, she blushed. Lin Ming, I am willing to follow you and serve you as my master. Taudi suddenly spoke at this moment. Taudi, they hadn't discussed such things just now. Now that Taudi suddenly wanted to acknowledge Lin Ming as his master, they couldn't help but be taken aback. After all, Taudi was a sage-tier powerhouse, and his arrogance was no inferior to any other sage-tier expert. Moreover, as one of the 4 great ancient fierce beasts, Taudi had always looked down on humans. Thus, when facing humans, Taudi was exceptionally irritable. Nobody expected this guy to acknowledge a human as his master so quickly. Me? What about me? Taudi waved his hand. Please agree, master. Taudi said again. Please don't, senior. Please don't call me master, I don't deserve the treatment. It wasn't just the 3 sage-tier experts, even Lin Ming was stunned. After all, his grandmaster, Gandalf, wasn't even stronger than Taudi. Please agree, master. Taudi actually knelt on the ground. Senior, if I need your help, I will naturally ask for it, and I believe that you won't refuse. Similarly, if you need me in the future, I will be honored to help you as well. Lin Ming hurriedly spoke. At this time, he couldn't possibly accept Taudi's request. Then can I follow you by your side? Since Taudi couldn't acknowledge Lin Ming as his master, he thought that it should be acceptable to follow Lin Ming. No matter what, he was still a sage-tier expert who had power that was rare even in the whole world. He wouldn't even pledge loyalty to a sage-tier expert, but facing Lin Ming, who had just reached tier 10, he was actually pleading for Lin Ming to accept him very well. Lin Ming could see that Taudi was sincere, so this time, Lin Ming didn't refuse. We are also willing to follow you. The remaining 3 sages also exchanged glances and said the same thing. This Lin Ming took a deep breath. A whole empire usually only had 1 sage, and now there were 4 of them that chose to follow him. Although Lin Ming didn't need the protection of sages since he had formidable strength himself, regardless of all that, 4 sages supporting him would be so much stronger than some magical beast army. Please don't refuse. Rattan God said. If all of you leave with me, I'm afraid Mountain Wookiee will be in chaos. Lin Ming scratched his head and said. Don't worry. These little brats won't dare to do anything, Dong King said. As the oldest sage-tier expert, Dong King had a clear grasp of the situation. Dong King had reached the sage tier long before Gandalf. However, it had been so long since he had reached the peak of the sage tier. Now that he saw Lin Ming, who was the juncture for his breakthrough, he couldn't bear to leave Lin Ming at all. I'll be right back. After saying this, Rattan God disappeared on the spot. He had gone to warn the little brats. Let's go. Rattan God's movements were extremely fast. He had just left for a few seconds before he was back at Lin Ming's side. Where are we going? Lin Ming hadn't even thought about the destination for his next adventure. To Lin Ming, only by adventuring would he be able to advance and grow. Now he had just finished growing and hadn't had time to rest. He didn't expect 4 sages to become his followers. Let's go meet those old geezers, Dong King said. In the past, he didn't always stay in Mountain Wookiee. It was just that for a long period, he had lost much of his fighting spirit, so he had been living in seclusion in Mountain Wookiee. Now that he met Lin Ming and finally saw the opportunity to break through, he saw hope. That was why Dong King was willing to follow Lin Ming after meeting him. That's fine too. But first, please gather 50 tier 10 magical beasts for me, Lin Ming said. Although he had 4 sage tier experts by his side now, it wouldn't look good for Lin Ming to order them around. An army of magical beasts, though, would be different. Senior Taudi doesn't have to give any more magical beasts. As for the other 3 seniors, please. Lin Ming spread out his hands and continued. That's easy, Dong King said. With a wave of his hand, he summoned 15 tier 10 magical beasts. The remaining 2 gathered their magical beasts and the number summed up to 50. Thank you, seniors, Lin Ming chuckled. As expected, doing things would be much easier if the other party was on good terms with him. The 4 sages looked at each other. Since they were following Lin Ming, these magical beasts were less important. Furthermore, if these magical beasts could survive while following Lin Ming, they would definitely have greater achievements in the future. Let's go then. Depart, Lin Ming said, and a few of them left the place. Stop. Lin Ming was suddenly stopped in the air. Some guards were still stationed in this place. What is the meaning of this? Taudi snorted coldly, and his sage tier aura erupted. Calm down, Lin Ming hurriedly said. Lin Ming knew that these guards were the line of defense here, and constantly faced danger. They were worthy of respect. Sage tier expert. The guards were dumbfounded. No sage tier experts had entered recently, thus this meant that the person in front of them was a sage tier expert from Mountain Wookiee who wanted to leave this place. Please wait. Just as Lin Ming and the others were about to move on, a voice rang out once more. Suddenly, a figure arrived. It was also a sage tier expert. Why are the few of you in the mood to leave Mountain Wookiee? The sage tier expert looked at the four of them and asked, Look at who this is. Don't you recognize him? Rattan God pointed at Lin Ming. Lin Ming. The sage tier expert had only noticed Touty and the others. Now that he suddenly saw Lin Ming at the back, he immediately gasped. Please go ahead. The sage tier expert gestured with his hand as he said. Seeing Lin Ming, he felt relieved. He also understood why they were leaving the mountain. Hey, you're not going to stop us from leaving. Dong King sneered. Why are you saying such things? When we asked you to come out of the mountain, you didn't come out either, did you? The sage tier expert retorted without showing any weakness. Lin Ming, the situation in the battlefield at the center of Giant City has been very tense recently. Please go and take a look. The sage tier expert looked at Lin Ming and said, Their sage tier experts are starting to make trouble as well? Lin Ming frowned and asked. Not quite, but they've suddenly miraculously produced many tier 9 and tier 10 experts. Right now, they're suppressing us, the sage tier expert said. Since they're suppressing us, why are you still here? Gunyang asked. Don't interrupt. It's not like you don't know that sage tier experts can't interfere in such matters, the sage tier expert spoke. Especially their magical beasts, many are a tier 10. I wonder what secret technique those sons of AB*TCH used, the sage tier expert added. I got it, Lin Ming nodded and said. Wait, the sage tier expert suddenly spoke up again. What is it, senior? Lin Ming asked. To tell the truth, I didn't come here to guard this place. I came here to borrow troops, the sage tier expert thought for a moment before speaking. Now that you're rushing over, the matter of borrowing troops doesn't matter anymore. I believe that if you rush over, the sage tier experts of the underworld wouldn't dare to send as many tier 10 experts instead, the sage tier expert said. Let's go back together. The sage tier expert consciously stood behind Lin Ming as he said this. One had to know that Lin Ming's commuting spiritual treasure was of the highest tier. No matter where they stood, even if there was a distance of a football field between them, the spiritual treasure's coverage was more than enough. With this, they still chose to stand behind Lin Ming, which showed their desire to follow him. Okay, Lin Ming nodded, and his spiritual treasure advanced at the highest speed towards the center of Giant City. At this moment, in the center of Giant City, a sage tier expert stood up. They are forcing us to make a move. Another sage tier expert also frowned. Our tier 10 experts can't hold on any longer. Giant City is about to be breached. Gandalf stood up as well and looked at everything that was happening below the palace. These sons of AB*TCH. Half of the tier 10 experts in the underworld should have been suppressed by Lin Ming. How can they have so many tier 10 experts all of a sudden? The sage tier experts couldn't sit still anymore. If only Lin Ming was here. A sage tier expert couldn't help but say. If Lin Ming was here, the underworld troops would probably have been suppressed long ago. That's right. Why don't you call your precious disciple over? After hearing the sage tier expert's words, another sage tier expert spoke as well. The problem is that I don't know his location right now, Gandalf sighed. The jade pendant on Lin Ming which could be used to communicate had been completely corroded during Lin Ming's fusion with the origin of life. Thus, the current Gandalf had no idea of Lin Ming's current location or situation. Normally, he would have gone to look for Lin Ming, but the current situation was urgent and he had no time to do so. Plus, Gandalf also knew that nothing would happen to Lin Ming. If Lin Ming were here, these things wouldn't be a problem, a sage tier expert said. Although Lin Ming was only at tier 7 when he had left, in the hearts of these sages, a monster like Lin Ming was definitely the strongest person below the sage tier. If it were a fight between sages, they might not think of Lin Ming. But now that the fight was between tier 10 experts, the first person they thought of was Lin Ming. At this moment, Lin Ming was still on his way. The speed is not fast enough, the sage tier expert said. Even though the commuting spiritual treasure that the sage tier experts had wasn't better than Lin Ming's current commuting spiritual treasure, the speed was still somewhat slow. At the speed, it would take at least a full day to reach Mountain Wookiee. If they used up such a long time, Giant City would be destroyed by the time they reached. I'll help you, Rattengod said. As he made his move, the commuting spiritual treasure started advancing at a terrifying speed. I'll help you as well. Of the remaining 3 people, one reinforced the spiritual treasure while the rest helped increase the speed. Faster! Lin Ming's power burst out, and the commuting spiritual treasure became even faster. The commuting spiritual treasure was advancing at such a speed that sonic booms could be heard. At this moment, in the center of Giant City, the battlefield was in chaos. The front lines had been breached. The entire Giant City was in a complete panic. Even if Sage tier experts were commanding the armies, due to the rule that the Sage tier experts couldn't make a move, they were still at an extreme disadvantage. It's over. Those bastards have already charged out of Giant City. Gandalf frowned and said, "Activate the state of emergency." A Sage tier expert stood up and sounded the alarm. The giants in the surrounding giant cities all moved out at this moment. The giants had strong bodies and huge bodies, but their strength was still limited, just like how only a small portion of the human race had reached Tier 10. There were many Tier 10 experts of the underworld who had rushed out of Giant City. Fortunately, the giant city where the battlefield was at was the center of all the giant cities. Each giant city was very far away from each other. Therefore, the underworld creatures weren't a threat to the other races yet. It was fortunate that the giants had large bodies and excellent recovery abilities. So although they suffered some injuries, the death rate was exceptionally small. Damn, we finally broken through this damned battlefield in the central giant city. From now on, this place will be ours. A Tier 10 underground expert laughed loudly. Whoosh! Suddenly, a powerful attack landed on the body of this Tier 10 underworld expert. The Tier 10 expert, who had been excited just a moment ago, was instantly killed by this sudden attack. I can see that the situation is urgent this time. To think that there are actually underworld creatures that have rushed out of Giant City, Lin Ming said with a frown. I didn't expect that the underworld creatures would be able to push the war to this stage in just a few days. The Sage tier expert who had returned with Lin Ming frowned and said, Lin Ming, only you can do it. The Sage tier expert glanced at Lin Ming and said, Okay, Lin Ming nodded. Now, he was going to show his strength. If Lin Ming makes a move, although he hasn't reached the Sage tier, I'm afraid that it will be a one-sided battle. Kauti had experienced Lin Ming's power before. A single attack from Lin Ming had forced him to reveal his true form. This sort of power was invincible in battles below the Sage tier. Lin Ming is back. Gandalf, who was in the center of the giant city, said with relief. What did you say? Lin Ming is back? Upon hearing Gandalf's words, the remaining Sage tier experts sensed Lin Ming's aura as well. Thank God, that's great. Lin Ming is just on time. The other Sage tier experts spoke excitedly. They could finally heave a sigh of relief. For some reason, Lin Ming was able to give them peace of mind, as if he had some sort of magic. This time, we'll definitely win. An underworld sage said. And I'm just worried that the above-ground sages won't be able to hold themselves back. If so, we'll lose a lot of our people and resources. Another underground sage said. They should be able to hold themselves back. After all, with such a sudden attack from the underworld, they should be feeling some fear. Yet another underworld sage shook his head. This was true. The reason why Gandalf and the others had held themselves back and hadn't attacked was that with the sudden appearance of so many underworld Tier 10 and Tier 9 experts, they were wondering if more Sage tier experts were hiding in the underworld. Therefore, Gandalf and the others hadn't made a move yet. What's going on? An underworld Sage tier expert suddenly frowned. All the Tier 10 underworld experts who have rushed out of Giant City just now have been killed. The underworld Sage tier experts said in disbelief. Weren't most of their forces concentrated on the battlefield in Giant City? Even if they had reinforcements, they couldn't have been so fast. Another underworld Sage tier expert couldn't believe what his senses told him either. Lin Ming is back. The voice of the underworld Sage tier expert in the center became extremely cold. At this moment, Lin Ming was holding a Tier 10 underworld expert in his hands. Lin Ming was actually able to crush this underworld berserker with just pure physical strength. Lin Ming's physical body had reached a certain extreme after he went through nirvana. With a crack, Lin Ming exerted some strength and directly broke the neck of the berserker. Sage tier seniors of the underworld, I'll give you one last chance. Retreat to the underworld. Otherwise, don't blame me for starting a massacre. Lin Ming's voice was filled with coldness. It actually made the underworld sage tier experts feel fear. Even if you are somewhat capable, I don't believe that your stupa can be used again in such a short time. After all, you are merely a tier 7 before the sage who had spoken could finish his words. He had already sensed the magical aura emanating from Lin Ming's body, and he nearly bit his tongue off. He's already at tier 10. How is this possible in such a short time? Previously, Lin Ming had advanced with godly speed from tier 1 to tier 2, then from tier 2 to tier 3, and so on. With such speed, even if one were to say that Lin Ming was a monstrous genius, it was acceptable. However, Lin Ming had leaped from tier 7 to tier 10. With such a cultivation speed, how could he only be a monstrous genius? He was simply unreal. What? Do you want me to repeat it for you? Lin Ming sneered, losing his patience. No matter how powerful you are still only a tier 10 mage. Without the stupa, I don't believe that we can't defeat you with so many tier 10 experts. The underworld sage tier expert in the center didn't back down at all. Instead, he spoke coldly. Tusk, how many tier 10 experts do you have? Lin Ming sneered as well. No matter what, I did give you a chance, Lin Ming said. Make your move. The underworld sage tier expert looked coldly at Lin Ming. He believed that without the stupa, Lin Ming would not be as great a threat as he claimed to be to the many tier 10 underworld experts. Come out, Lin Ming said. The stupa opened, and 50 tier 10 magical beasts directly appeared from the stupa. The 50 tier 10 magical beasts charged straight at the underworld magical beasts that were attacking Giant City. With the addition of these 50 magical beasts, the set outcome of the battle changed. Even a tier 10 expert, with a strong physical body, wouldn't be able to withstand the power of 50 tier 10 magical beasts charging at the same time. As expected, no one can stop Lin Ming. A sage tier expert couldn't help but feel excited as he watched Lin Ming save the situation. Roar! The 50 tier 10 magical beasts attacked at the same time. It could be said that this was an unprecedented scene. But now, under Lin Ming's control, they were charging at the same time. Even if the opponent were tier 10 experts, they wouldn't be able to withstand the beast tide of tier 10 magical beasts. With Lin Ming's control, the underworld, which had previously held an absolute advantage, was now completely defeated. Lin Ming, you! One of the underworld sage tier experts felt so angry that he couldn't catch his breath. If it weren't for someone holding him back, he would have made a move to kill Lin Ming. Do you dare to take back your magical beasts and fight us fair and square? An underworld tier 10 expert said. Unexpectedly, the people of the underworld were now the ones who were in the right. Tusk, you're really shameless, Lin Ming sneered. The underworld had attacked his world following a set of rules, and now that they saw they were at a disadvantage, they started to maintain that the weak were in the right. I'm asking you if you dare. The underworld tier 10 expert knew that his words would attract many looks of disdain, but at this time, this was the only choice left. Sure, Lin Ming sneered. Come back. With Lin Ming's order, all the magical beasts returned to the stupa. And your stupa too. You can't. The underworld tier 10 expert opened his mouth again. Baal. Are you shameless? As soon as the underworld tier 10 expert said those words, sounds of condemnation immediately sounded. Sure, why not? Lin Ming put away the stupa. After all, the stupa's suppression ability had yet to cool down. Furthermore, Lin Ming had his own plans. I won't use my longevity monument and wheels of wrath too. Lin Ming smiled. I have given you enough respect, no? Lin Ming looked at the underworld tier 10 expert and asked. Yes, the underworld tier 10 expert couldn't help but nod. Well, you have to give me some respect too, Lin Ming said. Respect how? The underworld tier 10 expert asked, confused by Lin Ming's words. Giving your life to me is giving me the respect I deserve. The flame energy in Lin Ming's hand danced and landed on the underworld tier 10 expert. Oh! The underworld tier 10 expert didn't even have time to resist before he was turned into a pile of ashes. This instant kill. The underworld sage tier experts took a sharp inhale. Lin Ming was also a tier 10 expert himself. How could he instantly kill another tier 10 expert? Lin Ming actually broke through to tier 10 of the fire magic in such a short period. Even the sage tier experts of the above-ground world were in disbelief. Although they knew how monstrous Lin Ming was, they still couldn't believe how fast he was leveling up. The last time I saw him, he broke through to tier 3 in less than a month. What kind of monster is he? The underworld sage tier expert couldn't help but furrow his brows as he said, The scariest thing is that although he broke through at an incredible speed, his strength is still extremely powerful. The strength he has isn't something that can be obtained by someone of the same tier. The strength Lin Ming had could kill a tier 10 expert instantly. Could it be that he's a sage tier expert in disguise? An underworld sage tier expert couldn't help but ask. If this speculation of his had been put on someone else, it would have been refuted long ago. However, when such speculation was put on Lin Ming, no one refuted it. Even the other sages couldn't help but consider such speculation at this moment. Although it sounds a little surreal, I have this feeling too. Another underworld sage tier expert immediately spoke up. It is indeed unbelievable that a tier 10 fire mage possesses such power. Moreover, less than a month ago, Lin Ming was only a tier 7 mage. Now, the rumor that Lin Ming was a sage hiding his true identity had even begun to spread among the sage tier experts. That can't be. This guy must have had some sort of fortuitous encounter. If he had obtained the inheritance of a god tier expert, such a thing wouldn't be impossible. The underworld sage tier expert in the center shook his head as he said, and his words hit the nail on the head. Lin Ming could level up so quickly precisely because he had obtained the inheritance of the god of fire. Previously, Lin Ming had obtained the inheritance of the demon god, and now he has obtained another god tier inheritance. This is simply even the sages, including all above ground and underground sages, none had obtained a god tier inheritance. Thus, all of them were extremely envious of Lin Ming, who had yet to reach the sage tier, but had already obtained 2 god tier inheritance. Although the underworld had a god tier great elder who was in a deep sleep, this great elder didn't have any inheritances. Even the underworld sage tier expert in the center had only obtained some information, and not a real inheritance. The stupa, the wheels of wrath, and the longevity monument, all 3 divine artifacts are on him alone. He has also obtained 2 god tier inheritance. If we don't get rid of him now and wait till he's a sage at this point, the underworld sage tier expert in the center suddenly sighed. I'm afraid it'll be the end of the underworld. The underworld sage tier expert in the center took a deep breath. Although this matter wasn't something to be proud of, it was the truth. Nobody had ever seen anyone who could instantly kill an opponent at the same tier. Even if the opponent was of a higher tier, to think that Lin Ming could still instantly kill the opponent. Once Lin Ming reached the sage tier, he would probably be invincible within the sage tier as well. Big brother, what do you mean? Hearing the words of the sage tier powerhouse at the center, the hearts of the other underworld sage tier powerhouses started to stir. If we don't get rid of Lin Ming now, I'm afraid the destruction of the underworld will be soon to come. The sage tier expert in the center said with a sinister look in his eyes. The underworld sage tier experts clenched their fists tightly. Big brother, you mean? They now understood the intentions of the sage in the center, but they still had to consider and reconsider about making a move. Kill Lin Ming today. The sage in the center said coldly. We'll attack together later to make sure nothing goes wrong. If we fail this time, we won't have a chance in the future, the sage in the center added. Yes. The other sage tier experts of the underworld nodded. Big brother, how about we consider another option? After all, if we attack, I'm afraid that in the future one of the sage tier experts didn't approve of this. This kid is growing too fast. If we let him continue to grow, I'm afraid that our crisis will soon arrive, the sage tier expert in the center said coldly, and added, this is our only chance. The underworld sage tier magical beast nodded as well. If one asked who hated Lin Ming the most, the underworld sage tier magical beast would be the first to raise his hand. Thus, right now, the moment the sage tier expert in the center expressed his intentions to kill Lin Ming, he was the first to agree. He didn't care less about whether the 2 worlds would have a great war in the future. After all, he was a fanatical militant. Let's attack together, the sage tier expert in the center said. As he spoke, all the underworld sage tier experts immediately made their moves. Regardless of whether they had agreed or not. They were all making a move now. After all, once things were done, they had to follow through with it. As for Lin Ming, he had long sensed the danger. After all, these creatures from the underworld were truly worthy of the phrase sons of a B***tch. Lin Ming had long anticipated that they would make a move against him. After all, he posed too much of a threat to them. They would definitely think of all sorts of ways to eliminate him. Not good. At this moment, the above-ground sage tier experts who were rejoicing a minute ago were all panicking now. They had expected the underworld sage tier experts to attack, but their attack this time was too sudden. On top of that, due to the crisis just now, They had scattered the combat force and commanded them separately. Now that Lin Ming was suddenly attacked, they had no way to focus the combat force on protecting Lin Ming. Humph, sons of *tch. Lin Ming snorted coldly, and several defensive spiritual treasures appeared around Lin Ming. Do you really want to kill me? Lin Ming looked at them and asked. All the attacks of the underworld sage tier experts were blocked by Lin Ming's spiritual treasures. These spiritual treasures had almost reached their limits after being attacked by so many sage tier experts. If you want to become a god tier expert, the path is in my hands. If you kill me, don't even think about breaking through to the god tier for the rest of your lives. Lin Ming's voice was extremely piercing. All the sage tier experts heard it clearly. Waking up your god tier grade elder isn't as comfortable as becoming a god tier yourself. No, Lin Ming said. Big brother. Wait. As Lin Ming spoke, the underground sage tier experts fell into chaos. The underworld sage tier experts and magical beasts in the center of power naturally wanted to kill Lin Ming, but the other sage tier experts stopped them. After all, everyone was selfish. Not to mention, they were sage tier experts. One had to know that they were obsessed with breaking through to the god tier. That god tier great elder was the great elder of the underworld sages in the center of power and not their great elder. Cut the crap. Don't be fooled by him. This is our only chance. The underworld sage in the center of power was anxious after being stopped. At this moment, the above-ground sage tier experts had arrived to protect Lin Ming. I only have one thing to say. Is it true that the above-ground world and the underworld were originally one world? Lin Ming looked at the underworld sages and asked. Are you willing to sit down for a talk? Lin Ming looked at the underworld sages and spoke again. Big brother. A voice sounded from the side of the underworld sage who was the center of power. Even if the great elder were to awaken, wouldn't it be better if we ourselves reached the god tier? Another underworld sage tier expert, who didn't approve of slaughtering so many lives to awaken the great elder, spoke. Big brother. A few more people spoke from the side. Lin Ming's words just now had hit a sore spot, because it was a fact that the underworld and the above-ground world were originally one. The holy war back then was nothing more than a civil war within their world. And in the end, the world collapsed and the world split into two. Fine. The underworld sage in the center took a deep breath and spoke up. He knew that he could no longer control the situation. After hearing that Lin Ming was the juncture for them to become a god-tier expert, everyone no longer had the heart to fight Lin Ming. They also no longer had the heart to continue the battle with the above-ground world. In the beginning, the underworld powerhouses had agreed to awaken the Great Elder only because they could have hope of breaking through to the god tier by doing so. Now that they knew Lin Ming was the juncture of breaking through to the god tier, how could they possibly attack him? Lin Ming. Gandalf spoke from behind Lin Ming. It's all right. We were from the same world, to begin with. There's actually no need to fight day in and day out, Lin Ming said. Those who are willing to sit with me, please follow me to the palace. If you want to return to the underworld, I don't have the ability to stop you either. Lin Ming made a welcoming gesture and spoke. The few underworld sages nodded after hearing Lin Ming's words and followed behind him. In the end, the underworld sage and magical beast in the center of power also followed after Lin Ming. After all, no matter what, the temptation of advancing to the god tier was too great for them. I don't welcome the two of you. Lin Ming looked at the two people who had fought a long mental battle with themselves before following the others and said coldly, You brat. Upon hearing Lin Ming's words, the underworld sage tier magical beast immediately went berserk. You can't understand my words. Lin Ming looked at the underworld sage tier magical beast and spoke again. What if I insist? The underworld sage tier magical beast looked at the many sage tier experts around and said, Get lost. Lin Ming angrily shouted. The flame power around Lin Ming exploded, and within the flames, the heart of the world tree also exploded with power. Boom! Lin Ming immediately attacked. No one had expected Lin Ming to suddenly attack. This was especially so for the underworld sage tier magical beast. He had never thought that Lin Ming would attack him. After all, the gap between the sage tier and those below the sage tier was simply too great. When a tier 10 expert met a sage tier expert, they could be killed with just a thought from the sage. This was the difference between a sage and those below the sage tier. The difference was so great that a sage could kill a tier 10 expert with just a thought. And now, Lin Ming was using the strength of a tier 10 expert to clash with a sage tier expert. How dare you? Faced with Lin Ming's sudden attack, The underworld sage tier magical beast roared furiously. Lin Ming's actions were akin to stepping on his dignity and pride. Get lost. As soon as Lin Ming's voice rang out, Lin Ming's attack came crashing down. The origin of life in Lin Ming's body fused with the many mutated seeds of flame in Lin Ming's body, causing the air in the space to evaporate. At this moment, the underworld sage tier magical beast actually sensed a dangerous aura from Lin Ming. Bloodseeker. Lin Ming said coldly. In an instant, the Bloodseeker appeared in Lin Ming's hand. The most powerful offensive divine artifact had been reinforced with Lin Ming's formidable power. Boom! As a sage tier expert, the underworld sage tier magical beast's pride did not allow him to even consider dodging Lin Ming's attack. He raised his hands to receive Lin Ming's attack. At this moment, he was still somewhat underestimating his opponent. This was because he didn't believe that a tier 10 expert, no matter how strong, could pose a threat to a sage tier expert. Even so, he still gathered his strength, because he wanted to heavily injure Lin Ming at this moment. Of course, if he could kill Lin Ming, that would be for the best. Buzz. The explosions rang out everywhere, causing the battlefield on the ground to shatter into pieces. The underworld sage tier magical beast had initially ridiculed in his heart that Lin Ming was sending himself to his death. However, the minute he received Lin Ming's attack, his mind went completely blank. The underworld sage tier magical beast was sent flying hundreds of meters away by Lin Ming's punch. Roar! As a sage tier expert, the underworld sage tier magical beast had already gathered his strength. However, at this moment, it was still beaten into its original form by Lin Ming. The surrounding sage tier experts all had looks of disbelief on their faces. What kind of power was this? One had to know that in such a situation, if one showed one's original form, it could only be because one was forced to do so. Because one had suffered a huge blow, one was forced to reveal one's original form to raise one's combat prowess to the maximum. I told you to get lost, can't you hear me? Lin Ming looked coldly at the underworld sage tier magical beast that had been forced into his original form and said once more, roar! Now that the underworld sage tier magical beast had been forced back to his original form, he lost his temper and rationality. After all, what Lin Ming had done had just crushed all his pride and dignity as a sage. Even if he died, he wouldn't be able to erase this stain. Lin Ming, I want you to die. The underworld sage tier magical beast charged at Lin Ming. One could imagine the power that a sage tier magical beast possessed. Moreover, the current sage tier magical beast had used all of his power. How dare you harm my master? With this, Talty transformed into his true form as well and blocked in front of the underworld sage tier magical beast. As one of the 4 great ancient fierce beasts, Talty had a suppressing effect on the underworld sage tier magical beast thanks to his bloodline. In addition to that, Talty was also at the peak of the sage tier, so the underworld sage tier magical beast didn't dare to act rashly. How dare you harm our master? The remaining 3 sage tier experts of Mountain Wookiee also spoke coldly. As the 3 of them moved forward, they directly surrounded the underworld sage tier magical beast. Fine, we'll leave. The underworld sage in the center of power gritted his teeth and spoke. He was extremely wary of the 4 sage tier experts of Mountain Wookiee. Back then, Dong King alone had dealt him a heavy blow. Dong King, who was the first to become a sage tier expert, had the power that he couldn't help but be wary of. What's more, there were now 4 sage tier experts with combat power akin to Dong King surrounding them. Let's go. The underworld sage tier expert in the center of power pulled the sage tier magical beast and quickly left the above-ground world. Lin Ming, your current strength is truly terrifying. Gandalf walked towards Lin Ming and couldn't help but say. Even he didn't dare to say that he could make the underworld sage tier magical beast turn back into its true form with a single strike. To think that the current Lin Ming possessed such strength at tier 10. As for Talty, he was excited. Now, another sage tier expert had come to accompany him to be one of the magical beasts that had been forced into his true form by Lin Ming's attack. Although he hadn't been prepared at that time, it was still the truth that he had no choice but to turn back into his true form at that time due to Lin Ming's punch. You're not a mage, but a body cultivator. An underworld sage tier berserker looked at Lin Ming and asked. One had to know that Lin Ming had just punched straight at a sage tier magical beast. No. Lin Ming shook his head. The sage tier berserker didn't believe him. After all, it was impossible for a mage to have such a physique. Dual cultivation of magic and martial arts. Another saint-level expert asked at this moment. Well, strictly speaking, It can be considered as such. At this moment, Lin Ming didn't want to dwell on this problem with them. Let's go, seniors. Lin Ming made an inviting gesture. After Lin Ming made his move just now, the current Sage tier experts didn't dare to underestimate Lin Ming anymore. Moreover, Lin Ming's attitude earlier was very obvious. If one offended him, he would not hesitate to attack. Even if the person who offended him was a Sage tier expert, Lin Ming would not fear. He would still dare to attack the opponent head-on. All the Sage tier experts from the above-ground world and the underworld were now all sitting in the palace. Everyone, we are originally from the same world. The underworld had been too cruel, but it was all efforts to resurrect the god-tier Great Elder. However, if he were to be revived, not to mention that the above-ground world would be enslaved, even all of you from the underworld would lose your current status and become slaves. Lin Ming spoke calmly. And right now, I'm the juncture for the lot of you to break through to the god tier. All of you have witnessed how fast I'm leveling up. As such, I'm definitely a much more reliable choice than your Great Elder, Lin Ming said. How is it? Do you want to make a deal with me? Lin Ming looked at the underworld Sage tier experts and asked. Yes. An underworld Sage tier expert nodded. Lin Ming was right. No matter who they woke up, it wouldn't be as reliable as themselves becoming god-tier experts. After all, oneself was the most reliable thing one could rely on. Please speak, another Sage-tier expert spoke. I will then tell the things that I have learned in the juncture in detail with everyone. To put it bluntly, your Great Elder of the Underworld is merely a traitor of the world. That's why he can survive, Lin Ming said. What? Although they didn't have such a deep obsession with reviving the Great Elder, they wouldn't allow anyone to talk shit about their Great Elder. Don't be anxious. Listen to me. Lin Ming waved his hand, indicating for everyone not to be agitated. The whole world was looking for a juncture to break through to the god tier. Lin Ming continued. With this, Lin Ming told everyone whatever he had learned at the juncture. He also told them about the conversation he had with the god of fire in the longevity monument. And as the conversation went on, the underworld Sage tier experts who were somewhat reluctant just a moment ago now saw Lin Ming in a different light. They had come to realize that Lin Ming was their hope, not the god tier Great Elder. When the god tier Great Elder awakened, they would be enslaved. In addition, if the Grand Elder was indeed the traitors of the world, how could he be someone magnanimous? We are willing to call a truce, one of the underworld Sage tier experts said. But what about Big Brother? Although they had stopped the sage in the center of power from coming with them just now, and they hadn't left with him either, but he had always been the commander of the army for so many years. Thus, they had an indescribable obedience to the underworld Sage tier expert at the center. After being used by him for so long, the lot of you can't free yourselves from his grasp? Lin Ming asked. Others may not know, but you Sage tier experts don't know? You've been fighting against our world all year round just for the sake of awakening the Great Elder. Lin Ming opened his mouth to state the truth once more. Just for this, the innocent villagers of the underworld and all the experts below the Sage tier who had gone through all the trouble to get to a certain tier, have all lost their lives. Lin Ming continued. All right, there's no need to say any more. Let's raise our hands to vote. Another underworld Sage tier expert spoke. In the underworld, the Sage tier experts were treated like emperors. However, this Sage tier expert who had spoken didn't like the idea of using lives to awaken the Great Elder by transforming life force into the power of energy and blood. I agree. Yet another underworld Sage tier expert raised his hand. We'll follow the majority. Is that all right? Among all the underworld Sage tier experts, only had one disagreed. In addition, the sage who had disagreed was the one who had been nurtured by the Sage tier expert in the center of power. All right, let's call a truce. Seeing the majority had raised their hands in favor of calling a truce, one of the underworld Sage tier experts said, Lin Ming, if the above-ground world doesn't mind, can I stay here from now on? An underworld Sage tier expert asked Lin Ming. In any case, I've had enough of the tyrannical system of the underworld, the sage continued. Of course, we welcome you with open arms, Lin Ming nodded. If this Sage tier expert chose to stay in the above-ground world for a long time, the underworld definitely wouldn't continue to attack. After all, their own Great Elder was still in this world. As for whether the sage was a spy that the underworld intentionally sent to the above-ground world, Lin Ming could tell that the sage was honest about disliking the underworld system. I'll be able to break through to the Sage tier in a few days, Lin Ming, who was in the middle, suddenly spoke. This sentence shocked all the Sage tier experts present. What did you say? Are you serious? Lin Ming's words made them feel incredulous. After all, a tier 10 expert could already be considered a genius if he could break through to the sage tier within a few decades. You've only just broken through to tier 10. I'm afraid it'll be a little difficult. Another sage tier expert said doubtfully. Didn't I only have the magic power of tier 7 a few days ago? Lin Ming smiled and said. When Lin Ming said this, everyone fell silent. It was a fact that Lin Ming was merely a tier 7 mage a few days ago. In just a few days, he had jumped 3 tiers. He had become a tier 10 mage, and he had the power to instantly kill a tier 10 powerhouse, someone who was on the same tier as he was. It dampened all suspicions that Lin Ming did not have a solid foundation. I also wish to live in the above-ground world from now on. I hope that you won't mind. At this moment, as Lin Ming said this, another underworld sage tier expert spoke up. All right. Lin Ming nodded without hesitation. Lin Ming's words caused the underworld sage tier experts, who were still feeling some reluctance earlier, to immediately change their minds. They now completely believed that Lin Ming could break through that barrier. After all, a monster like Lin Ming definitely had this ability. However, they weren't certain of the time it would take for Lin Ming to break through to the god tier. After all, if he needed a long time for cultivation, they wouldn't be able to afford to wait. Thus, some of them still had other thoughts before Lin Ming had said those words. But now that Lin Ming had stated that he would be able to break through to the sage tier soon, the distracting thoughts in their hearts had completely disappeared. If it was someone else who had said such a thing, they wouldn't have believed it. But for a person who could leap 3 tiers in a short period and had an extremely stable foundation, to say such a thing here they had no choice but to believe it. Thus, right now, another sage tier expert who initially hadn't made up his mind had directly said that he would live in the above-ground world for a long time. Actually, the meaning of them saying these words were obvious. It meant that they would listen to Lin Ming's orders in this world. After all, they would always be under Lin Ming's nose. In the underworld, sages were kings, thus, it was somewhat difficult for them to accept the orders of a tier 10 mage. Me too. I hope you don't mind. At this moment, a third sage tier expert spoke. I'm willing as well. I hope you don't mind. At this moment, more and more underworld sage tier experts expressed their willingness to live in the above-ground world for a long time. In the end, there was only one underworld sage tier expert who did not explicitly express his loyalty. He said that he would return immediately after settling some matters in the underworld. This sage was the person who had been nurtured by the underworld sage at the center of power. Senior, please take care of your world upon your return. There's no need for you to come back here, Lin Ming smiled and said. You. The sage tier expert didn't expect Lin Ming to be so ruthless. I won't send you off. Lin Ming made a gesture and said. Everyone present was sage tier experts. It was given they would weigh the pros and cons. Lin Ming decided that he would give them the chance to do so. However, if at this point one still chose to go back to the underworld and inform the sage tier expert in the center, then sorry, but Lin Ming did not know himself as a saint who could tolerate everything. Fine. The underworld sage tier expert was flustered and exasperated. With a flick of his sleeve, he left. Everyone, welcome to our half of the world. We were one world to begin with. Please don't be reserved. Lin Ming stood up and spoke to the underworld sage tier experts of the underworld. Yes, yes, yes. The underworld sage tier experts all smiled and nodded. Lin Ming. At this moment, in the underworld, a furious roar sounded. It was the sage tier expert in the center. And now he had become a commander with no soldiers. How could he accept this? Furthermore, as the underworld sage tier expert surrendered to Lin Ming, his plan couldn't be carried out at all. As for taking the families of the sages who had surrendered as hostages to force them to return, wasn't such a thought a pure joke? It would have been tolerable if there were only 1 or 2 of them who had surrendered, but right now, only the 3 of them were still in the underworld. Thus, in order not to provoke the anger of the masses, he could only bear the anger himself. Right now, the underworld sage tier experts had decided to live in the above-ground world. With this, the attacks of the underworld had completely stopped. After all, no one dared to attack their ancestors. Furthermore, the sage tier experts in the center couldn't possibly continue attacking. After all, if he were to continue attacking now, it would be no different from making enemies for himself. Now, if he were to head over and meet those sage tier experts, They would probably still call him their big brother since they probably still had feelings for him, but if he were to make a move now, he would most likely lose all friendliness with them. According to the information his confidant had brought back, these Sage tier experts were definitely on Lin Ming's side. They had no intentions of returning and continuing to carry out the plan to awaken the Great Elder. After all, the most important thing for a cultivator was to become a god himself. He will become a sage soon, Lin Ming himself said that. The Sage tier expert at the center of power looked at his confidant and asked. If the words were said by the Sage tier experts on Lin Ming's side, there may be a percentage of exaggeration in those words, but if Lin Ming was the one who had said it himself, the chances of these words being true were much higher. After all, each person knew himself/herself the best. However, people like Lin Ming were people who were full of nonsense. It was Lin Ming who said it, and the underworld Sage tier experts firmly believed it. The confidant nodded and said, after all, it is a fact that Lin Ming advanced 3 tiers in a very short period without any instability in his foundation. He even has the ability to instantly kill people of the same tier. This confidant added said, I didn't expect a tier 10 mage to have such abilities. The sage in the center of power sighed and said, he was now resigned to his fate. He even thought about going to Lin Ming's side and staying there. But his dignity and his pride as a sage didn't allow him to do as such. Lin Ming, that bastard. If I have the chance, I'll definitely kill him. The underworld sage tier magical beast said through gritted teeth. His dignity had been completely shattered by Lin Ming's punch. With you? There's no chance. The Sage tier expert in the center said coldly. He was now extremely depressed. Facing the only Sage tier magical beast that had accompanied him to return previously, he didn't have a good expression either. He's just a tier 10 kid. If I have the chance, I'll definitely succeed. The Sage tier magical beast said stubbornly. Did you forget that you were punched into your original form? The Sage tier expert in the center spoke again. It was only because I had underestimated my opponent. The Sage tier magical beast was naturally stubborn and wouldn't admit to his inferiority. Forget it. This is pointless, the Sage tier expert in the center sighed. Have you counted the number of Sage tier experts of the same tier as you and me by Lin Ming's side? Apart from the 3 of us, all the Sage tier experts, both from the above-ground world and the underworld, are by Lin Ming's side. Although they probably won't attack you and me now, if you dare to make a move, I'm afraid they'll join forces to kill you, the Sage tier expert in the center spoke. The Sage tier magical beast wanted to retort, but he had no words to do so. After all, what the Sage tier expert in the center had said was absolutely correct. Although it was very difficult for a Sage tier expert to lose his life from attacks, if so many Sage tier experts joined forces, it would probably be very difficult for any sage to take it. Now, there's only one chance left for the 3 of us, the Sage tier expert in the center said. What chance? The underworld Sage tier magical beast felt extremely aggrieved. Thus, if there was a chance, he didn't want to let it go. Awaken the Great Elder. This is our only chance, the Sage tier expert in the center said. But now even with the absurd amount of the power of energy and blood and the power of the soul that they had gathered previously were unable to awaken the Great Elder. Just as they were about to succeed back then, Lin Ming had suddenly appeared in the underworld and sealed the Great Elder. Apart from the 3 of them, all the other underworld Sage tier experts were on Lin Ming's side. It was too difficult to attack now. At this moment, even the brainless Sage tier magical beast didn't want to be enemies with Lin Ming. I have an idea, of course. The Sage tier expert in the center said. All right, I'll listen to you, the Sage tier magical beast agreed. After all, Lin Ming had expressed his rejection clearly. At this point, there was no way for him to get close to Lin Ming anyhow. At this moment, in the above-ground world, everyone, since you are going to be living here for a long time, we are all family. I won't be too courteous then. Lin Ming stood up and said, Seniors, I have some matters to attend to. I'll take my leave first. Lin Ming cupped his fists and said, All right. The various Sage tier experts all nodded. Grandmaster, I'll have to trouble you to make arrangements for the seniors, Lin Ming said to Gandalf. Very well, Gandalf nodded. With so many Sage tier experts, some arrangements were indeed needed. Lin Ming had no heart to participate in such matters. It was better to leave such matters to these old foxes. After Lin Ming left, he entered the stupa. Lin Ming closed his eyes and thoroughly examined the mutated seeds of flame that he had obtained. Lin Ming had just obtained the mutated seeds of flame. As such, Other than knowing that the mutated seeds of flame were extremely powerful, Lin Ming did not have an inkling over anything else. 16 types of mutated seeds of flame. 16. How? Lin Ming separated the mutated seeds of flame and observed them one by one. Every seed of flame has its strength. Like this one, even if it is called a flame, its power is even colder than absolute zero. And this one, even the simplest attack with it has the ability to explode. As for this one, although it's a seed of flame, it can devour everything. After separating the mutated seeds of flame, Lin Ming finally understood the strengths of each mutated seed of flame. After merging all these flames, although my flame power is many times stronger, it still feels like the mutated seeds of flame are suppressing each other. In general, I can't fully utilize each of their strengths. Lin Ming took a deep breath and concluded. Now, I have to fully utilize the strengths of each flame. The current mutated seeds of flame were all fused, turning into the purest form of flame power. However, what Lin Ming needed was not the purest form of power. What he needed was the strongest form of power. If I do this, I can unleash the strongest form of power. Lin Ming suddenly thought of an extremely good idea. But if I do this, the danger is too great. But once I succeed, not only will my magic power become stronger, even my physical body will also become stronger. Lin Ming fell into deep thought. This is the only way. Lin Ming took a deep breath. Opportunities came with risks. Lin Ming decided to take the risk. What Lin Ming decided to do was to fuse these mutated seeds of flame into the various parts of his body. By doing this, Lin Ming will be able to control the mutated seeds of flame at will and give full scope to their various strengths and points. After all, the only thing he could completely control and be at ease with was his own body. Now he had 16 mutated seeds of flame and his body. It was just right to fuse them all in different parts of his body. His palms, arms, chest, as well as his internal organs. The riskiest part that he was going to attempt fusion was his brain. Lin Ming decided that he would fuse them all. Come out, Lin Ming said coldly. The 16 mutated seeds of flames appeared in front of Lin Ming. The mutated seed of flame I use in the fusion with my brain must be the strongest. There was naturally a division between strong mutated seeds of flames and weaker ones. Although the mutated seeds of flames the god of fire had in his hands were high-quality seeds and any of them would be the best of the best, there was still a ranking. It was needless to say that these 16 mutated seeds of flame were ranked in the top 16 among all seeds of flame. Otherwise, how could the god of fire have gained his title? Let's start from the palm. Lin Ming took a deep breath. Right now, he had to start the fusion from the least risky part of his body, his palms. Crack! Lin Ming's palm turned as black as charcoal in an instant. However, the life force in Lin Ming's body repaired his palm in the next second. Lin Ming's body was now quite strong anyway, thus it wasn't too difficult for his palm to fuse with a mutated seed of flame. When he fused the mutated seeds of flames with his arms, although it was slightly more painful than doing so with his palms, there weren't any problems. Soon, Lin Ming had completed fusion on his palms, arms, legs, and other exposed body parts. Next, he moved on to fusion on his internal organs. The 11 types of mutated seeds of flame he had left were ranked from 2nd to 12th. When it came to the internal organs, it was much more difficult to fuse a mutated seed of flame with each organ. The risks shoot up through the roof as well. Even body forging did not allow training on one's internal organs. However, Lin Ming had reconstructed his physical body through nirvana once, thus his internal organs were very strong. Unfortunately, he couldn't just fuse the mutated seeds of flame with himself just by relying on the strength of his internal organs. It seems like I'll need the help of a few Sage Tier seniors to complete the fusion on my internal organs. Lin Ming knew that although it was fine to risks, he had to do it in the safest environment possible. Seniors, please help me. The old foxes were chatting. Even though they had been enemies for so long, they were now seemingly as close as old friends who hadn't seen each other for many years. However, before they could continue being hypocritical, Lin Ming's figure appeared. What's wrong, Lin Ming? Seeing Lin Ming appear, the Sage Tier experts immediately stood up. I want to fuse my body with the mutated seeds of flame. Thus I need seniors to protect me, particularly water mages, ice mages, and healing mages, Lin Ming said to the Sage Tier experts. All right, the Sage Tier experts with the magic elements that Lin Ming had mentioned stood up. Such a scene could be said to have never happened before. To think that a single sentence from a Tier 10 mage could make so many Sage Tier experts stand up, it was truly unimaginable. Those mutated seeds of flame of yours are good stuff, but what you said just now, to fuse them with your internal organs, don't you think it's too dangerous? A sage tier expert looked at Lin Ming and said, one can only achieve success after going through huge pain. Besides, if I didn't feel that it would be too dangerous, I wouldn't have bothered seniors. Lin Ming smiled and said, you can do the fusion here. We'll all stay here to protect you, Gandalf said. Right now, as a tier 10 mage, Lin Ming was preparing to fuse himself with the mutated seeds of flame, and all the sages, both from the above-ground world and the underworld, were all protecting Lin Ming. This was Lin Ming's ability. After all, he was their hope in becoming a god-tier mage. Please allow me to trouble seniors. Lin Ming cupped his fists and closed his eyes. In front of Lin Ming, 11 mutated seeds of flame floated. First fusion. As Lin Ming said this, a mutated seed of flame fused into his liver. Second fusion. Lin Ming said again. Third fusion. Fourth fusion. His heart, spleen, liver, lungs, and kidneys were fused with the mutated seeds of flame. Oh. Lin Ming was currently feeling numbing pain. Now, although it was the fusion of his 5 vital organs and the mutated seeds of flame, Lin Ming's entire body was burning. This was god-tier power. This was the flame power used by the god of fire. Now, it had actually been fused into Lin Ming's 5 vital organs. Bedtime trick melts belly and leg fat, shocks doctor's mega slim body back then. Even the god of fire hadn't attempted such a thing. The sage tier experts suddenly realized that their water magic was completely ineffective against the mutated seeds of flame. In other words, their water magic was completely unable to extinguish the mutated seeds of flame. Furthermore, the water magic didn't alleviate any of Lin Ming's pain at all. Lin Ming felt as if his body was about to explode from the torment of the constant clash between ice and fire. How can my water magic be frozen? What kind of seed of flame is this? A sage tier expert frowned and asked. Lin Ming is too dangerous right now. These mutated seeds of flame are too abnormal. Lin Ming only has tier 10 fire magic, but we can't even extinguish the seeds of flame that he has activated. Seeing that their water magic was unable to extinguish the seeds of flame, these people panicked. Let me try. The ice mages came forward at this moment. They were all looking at Lin Ming nervously. However, ice magic was useless as well against Lin Ming's mutated seeds of flame. Use healing magic, stabilize him first, Gandalf said anxiously. The few sage tier healing mages nodded and surrounded Lin Ming with healing magic. This finally made Lin Ming feel a little better, but the power of the mutated seeds of flame was too great. The healing spells could merely treat the symptoms, not the root. Oh. Lin Ming felt that his 5 vital organs were about to be burned clean. Healing magic poured into Lin Ming's 5 vital organs and body. However, 1 second the 5 vital organs were repaired, in the next they were immediately burned. Moreover, the speed of the burning far exceeded the speed of the healing. One had to know that the spells cast were done with sage tier magic. To think that the sage tier healing spells were not very effective on Lin Ming, who was only a tier 10 mage. Buzz. Suddenly, a terrifying amount of life force burst out from Lin Ming's heart. This was the origin of life, which had let out a burst of life force when Lin Ming was facing an emergency. At this moment, the origin of life instinctively felt extreme danger, and was thus providing Lin Ming with an endless stream of life force. Lin Ming's pained body finally felt a trace of warmth. The raging flame burning in Lin Ming's 5 vital organs was finally extinguished by this spurt of life force. Lin Ming had his eyes shut as he looked at his 5 vital organs. He let out a deep breath. Finally, after Lin Ming's withered vital organs were crazily watered by the spring of life force, the shriveled and withered vital organs had now completely fused with the mutated seeds of flame. Lin Ming could feel the powerful strength hidden within his body. The process of fusion with the mutated seeds of flame was naturally extremely painful, and could even be said to be fatally dangerous. That being said, one could imagine what benefits a successful fusion would bring to one. After all, the greater the benefits something would bring, the more dangerous it would be. The fusion on the vital organs is done. Next up are the gallbladder, stomach, large intestine, small intestine, bladder, and sanjiao. Lin Ming let out a breath, which even contained crazily powerful flame power. Lin Ming, you should rest for a while before proceeding with the fusion, Gandalf said worriedly at this moment. No need. It's better to do everything in one go. Lin Ming shook his head and said. Lin Ming's current body had already developed some resistance towards the mutated seeds of flame. Furthermore, Lin Ming had already gotten used to the pain. Therefore, it was naturally better to just complete the fusion now. The most important point was that the power of the origin of life in Lin Ming's body had been completely stimulated. If Lin Ming continued the fusion now, he would naturally be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. Plus, by doing so, he could also be considered to have minimized the risks. The many Sage tier experts surrounding him were extremely nervous. After all, they knew how dangerous it was. Just now, even the power of the sages was unable to extinguish the mutated seeds of flame in Lin Ming's body. Lin Ming, wait. Suddenly, a voice rang out. What's wrong? Lin Ming turned his head to look. It was Rattan God who had spoken. The origin of life you fused was the heart of the world tree. I have a twig of the world tree with me here. As he said this, a twig appeared in Rattan God's hand. The life force within the twig was so vigorous that it was suffocating. This is for you, Rattan God said. There's no need. I have already fused the heart, so there's no need for me to fuse a twig of the world tree. Lin Ming waved his hand and said. Lin Ming knew that the twig of the world tree would be more useful to Rattan God since he was a branch of the tree of life. Don't refuse. I can't fuse with the other twigs of the world tree unless I can break past my current tier. But it's different for you. You now have the heart of the world tree, so you can totally fuse with the twig of the world tree. The benefits of doing so are extremely great, and it's what you need the most now. After all, you're still unable to completely control the heart of the world tree. Even if you've reached the sage tier, it will still be the same. Rattan God insisted on handing the twig to Lin Ming. He had been unable to fuse with the origin of life. After all, he was just a branch. After gaining intelligence, he had cultivated step by step till he reached the sage tier. However, even if after he had reached the sage tier he was still unable to fuse with the origin of life. Just like a finger, no matter how thick it was, it couldn't possibly fuse with the heart, because the finger simply could not do so. As for the heart, it was easy for it to control a finger. The twig of the world tree is just nice for you now. As for me, it will be enough for me if you don't forget about me even after you break through the barrier, Rattan God continued. Thank you, Senior. Lin Ming lowered his head and said. You're welcome. Rattan God waved his hand and passed the twig to Lin Ming. Fusion. Lin Ming said and fused the twig into his body. As if it had returned to where it was supposed to be, the twig easily fused into his body. At this moment, as the twig of the tree of life was fused by Lin Ming could feel a breath of life force spreading in his body. As expected, Lin Ming nodded. The twig of the tree of life was indeed the most suitable for his current self. After all, the current Lin Ming was completely unable to activate the power of the world tree's heart. The world tree's heart had only instinctively activated its life force just now. Even though it was activated passively and its power had only leaked a little, it was still enough to heal all damages caused by the mutated seeds of flame and completely repair Lin Ming's vital organs. This proved how powerful the origin of life was. One had to know that back then, the world tree was at the peak of the god tier. The gathering points of the world tree's power were all at its heart. The power was too strong that Lin Ming was unable to control it. Twigs were a different story though. Lin Ming could fully utilize the power within them. Everyone, thank you for going through the trouble. After he said this, Lin Ming started the fusion once more. Fusion! Lin Ming said coldly. At this moment, Lin Ming himself was also extremely nervous. After all, the pain brought by fusion was simply unbearable. Following Lin Ming's control, the 6 mutated seeds of flame started to fuse with Lin Ming's organs. Oh, the tearing pain was several times more severe than before. Maintain Lin Ming's consciousness, Gandalf said loudly. The pain had caused Lin Ming's thoughts to be disrupted for an instant. It's okay, Lin Ming said in a hoarse voice. No matter how painful it was, Lin Ming's consciousness maintained the last bit of clarity. After all, if he lost all consciousness and fainted, his body would become a mere burning object. He would then probably turn into a pile of ashes. Who? Lin Ming panted heavily. The entire battlefield even began to melt due to the terrifyingly high temperature. One had to know that this battlefield had been forged with special materials, and had been honed over a long time. It was normal for a powerful person to be able to leave a few marks on the battlefield, but not even a dozen fire mages attacking the same spot would be able to leave a gap on the battlefield. And now, just the energy released from Lin Ming's fusion with the mutated seeds of flame had melted the battlefield. The Sage tier experts by the side watched Lin Ming's fusion anxiously. They had no choice but to put up a protective barrier around their bodies. This was because even a Sage tier expert's body wouldn't be able to withstand such a temperature without the protection of a protective barrier. With this, one could tell just how much pain Lin Ming was suffering. After all, this unspeakable flame power was fusing with Lin Ming's organs, burning them at zero distance. It was only because Lin Ming had gone through nirvana twice, and had his body refined countless times, that he could barely withstand the heat and pain. If it were any ordinary tier 10 expert, they would probably be turned into ashes in an instant. However, even though Lin Ming's physical body was quite powerful, the pain that the fusion brought Lin Ming was real and was not weakened at all. On the contrary, the longer this pain lasted, the harder it was to bear. Pooh! A simple exhale caused the ground of the battlefield to melt. When Lin Ming raised his head once again, cracks had already appeared on his face. After all, one's internal organs were connected to one's body. Under the huge damage brought by the flames, the feeling that Lin Ming's current body gave off was as if he was in tatters. It was like an extremely exquisite porcelain doll had fallen directly onto the ground and thus ended up with countless cracks. At this moment, Lin Ming could no longer sit upright. Just as Lin Ming's body was about to fall, a force supported his cross-legged posture. Healing magic can alleviate the pain in Lin Ming's body. With this, the Sage tier healing mages beside him began to frantically cast spells on Lin Ming. The cracks on Lin Ming's body began to slowly heal. However, the flames on Lin Ming's body also became more and more intense. It was as if Lin Ming's internal organs were burning material. The healing magic from the side was surrounding Lin Ming tightly. At this moment, Lin Ming seemed to be lying in a jar of healing magic. This allowed Lin Ming to catch his breath. Lin Ming, use the twig of the world tree now. The voice of Rattan God sounded in Lin Ming's ears. Okay, Lin Ming agreed, his voice hoarse. Lin Ming fully activated the power of the twig of the world tree. Originally, Lin Ming had planned to use the twig of the world tree when he fused the mutated seed of flame with his brain. Now it seemed that he had no choice but to use it in advance. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to even endure the fusion on his organs. Besides, if he used the twig of the world tree now, it would also completely merge with his organs. The benefits that this brought to Lin Ming would be immeasurable. It could be said that if the fusion was successful this time, then just Lin Ming's physical body alone would be able to bring him enough life force. He would then no longer have to absorb and convert life force. The world tree was literally a tree. The branches and twigs of the world tree were just like the buds of a tree, able to produce fresh oxygen. In the future, with a twig of the world tree in his body, Lin Ming could continuously produce life force. Swish! As the twig of the world tree was stimulated by Lin Ming's power, the flames in Lin Ming's body were slowly extinguished as well. At this moment, Lin Ming's shriveled organs were filled with life force. Now was the final and most crucial moment of the fusion. Fuse! Lin Ming said with a hoarse voice. As he said this, the flames in his 6 organs, which had been extinguished with great difficulty, began to burn once again. The pain that the second round of burning brought to Lin Ming was even more intense. At this moment, the power of the world tree's twig was completely activated. Finally, Lin Ming opened his eyes. Currently, the mutated seeds of flame have been successfully fused with all his internal organs. The life force that came after the successful fusion was suffocating. Lin Ming stood up and felt that his body was as light as an arrow. Originally, there were still some flaws in his internal organs. After all, even though Lin Ming had gone through body forging, he couldn't tamper with his internal organs. Now that he had been tempered by the mutated seeds of flame, it could be said that Lin Ming possessed the strongest physical body. Even a tier 10 expert who specialized in body forging wouldn't be as strong as Lin Ming. Congratulations, Lin Ming. Your foundation now is truly enviable. A Sage tier expert's voice sounded. His words were sincere. That's right. If we had half of your foundation, we would have been able to figure out how to break through this barrier after so many years. Another Sage tier expert nodded and said, Congratulations, Master. Congratulations. Touty stepped forward and congratulated. Senior, I've already said, please don't call me that. Then Ming quickly waved his hand and said, This time, many thanks for the twig of the world tree, Senior Rattan God. Without it, I'm afraid it would have been really difficult for me to persist until the fusion was over. Lin Ming bowed to Rattan God. Without the world tree's twig, it would have been impossible for Lin Ming to endure the pain and burning damage brought by the fusion till it succeeded. Moreover, the benefits of fusing the twig of the world tree were immeasurable. It's the same sentence from me. Just don't forget about me after you break through the barrier. Rattengod waved his hand and said with a smile. Kid, you really know how to play chess, Dong King said from the side. Right now, although Lin Ming was only a tier 10 mage, a favor from Lin Ming was too valuable. At this moment, the underworld sage tier experts were completely loyal to Lin Ming. After all, Lin Ming's abilities proved that Lin Ming didn't brag about breaking through to the sage tier in a short time. Among the sages, one of the underworld fire mages was the most envious of Lin Ming's foundation. After all, the mutated seed of flame he possessed was rank 22nd. Even so, it still caused his battle strength to rise sharply. And now, the mutated seeds of flame that Lin Ming had fused in such a short period were a staggering number of 15. Furthermore, the mutated seeds of flame that were ranked 1st to 16th were all in Lin Ming's hands. Everyone, I haven't finished what I need to do. There's still one more, Lin Ming said. There's still one more. Are you thinking of? Gandalf frowned and asked. They looked at the mutated seed of flame ranked 1st and frowned. Could it be that Lin Ming was going to go that far? Yes, seniors, I suppose all of you are thinking it now. I'm going to fuse it into my head. Lin Ming nodded and said. Lin Ming, I advise you to think twice before you act, Dong King said at this time. That's right. You should know that the internal organs can be repaired, but the head, especially the brain, cannot be repaired at all. Gandalf also spoke at this moment. To fuse the mutated seed of flame that was ranked 1st with one's head, such an act could no longer be described as being mad. It could only be described as courting death. The internal organs could be repaired and could also be replenished with life force, but that was not the case for the head. This was especially true for one's brain. Once it was damaged, even losing consciousness would be a fortunate outcome. It would be extremely normal for him to just die. There was no way that the sage tier experts would allow Lin Ming to take such a risk, especially since he was clearly courting death. They never expected Lin Ming to have such a crazy idea. They also never expected Lin Ming to make such a decision even though he knew the consequences. Master, I don't agree with you doing this either. Taudi also spoke at this time. Lin Ming, you fused so many mutated seeds of flame. Your foundation is now unprecedented and can never be copied. There's no need for you to do such a crazy thing now. The sage tier experts around all treated Lin Ming as the straw for them to break through the god tier barrier. That's right, Lin Ming. It's too dangerous. With your current foundation, there's no need for you to take such a risk. The people around were all talking at the same time. None of them wanted Lin Ming to do it. I have to do this, Lin Ming said. If I succeed, I'll be a half-step sage. Moreover, if the fusion is successful, my body won't have any weaknesses, Lin Ming continued. Although my foundation is indeed good, I have OCD. I don't want my head to become my weakness. If I complete the fusion, what I have control over will be completely different from now. Lin Ming added, since I've already decided to do something, might as well go to the extreme and reach the limits. This was Lin Ming's attitude on life. Either don't do it or reach the limit. The greater the risk, the higher the reward. This is an unchanging principle. The process of fusing his head with the mutated seed of flame would be filled with life-threatening danger. However, once the fusion was successful, Lin Ming wouldn't have any flaws. Therefore, seniors, there's no need to advise me, Lin Ming spoke. All right, Lin Ming, I support you at this moment. Gandalf sighed and spoke. He understood Lin Ming the most. He was very aware that no one could stop Lin Ming's decision. At the same time, he also believed in Lin Ming. Lin Ming had always been a person who could create miracles. Although he had resisted at first, the resistance was instinctive. Gandalf would always be supportive of Lin Ming. Seniors, I really need your protection this time. I'm afraid. Lin Ming stood up and bowed to the sage tier seniors. We'll definitely do our best to protect you. The sage tier experts all nodded. Wasn't this nonsense? After all, Lin Ming was their only hope of becoming a god. If anything happened to Lin Ming, it could be said that no one could break through the barrier. After all, for hundreds and thousands of years, no one had been able to possess such ability. If something really happened to Lin Ming, the above-ground and underworld sages would probably be at war again. The matters concerning Lin Ming were too great. So great that even with so many sage tier experts, all of them were extremely nervous. I'm starting. Lin Ming took a deep breath. He knew what he was facing. Fusion. Amidst the nervous emotions of the sages, Lin Ming began the fusion. All. Lin Ming's hair disappeared in an instant. His eyebrows and so on all disappeared as well. He lost all sight, because the moisture in Lin Ming's eyes had been instantly evaporated. The suffering of falling into the darkness caused the Lin Ming to feel dizzy. Meanwhile, Lin Ming's consciousness had already begun to blur. The pain caused by the fusion of his brain with the mutated seed of flame was simply unbearable. In just a short moment, Lin Ming's thoughts had completely disappeared. Lin Ming's consciousness was also in complete chaos. Lin Ming's eyes had already disappeared. Although Lin Ming's body hadn't collapsed yet due to the support of this power, his consciousness had already completely entered darkness. Lin Ming. The many sages noticed Lin Ming's abnormality. Whoosh! Suddenly, Lin Ming's head disappeared. It was as if it had been completely burned. It's over. An underworld sage tier expert gasped. He gave up on supporting Lin Ming. Not so fast. There are still signs of life on Lin Ming's body. Don't stop. Gandalf said loudly. Although Lin Ming's head had already disappeared, the signs of life on Lin Ming's body were still normal. Healing mages, use healing power. Pour the purest power on Lin Ming's body to nourish him. Gandalf said. Under Gandalf's command, all the sage tier experts calmed down. They were sage tier experts after all, so they could see things very clearly. Lin Ming's head had disappeared, but that didn't mean that Lin Ming had died or failed. At this moment, a bridge appeared in Lin Ming's consciousness. After crossing the bridge, Lin Ming arrived at a house where everyone was waiting anxiously. General, please do not worry. A soldier standing in front of a man said. Wow! As a cry sounded, a midwife appeared in front of the general. General, congratulations. You have a son, the midwife said with a smile. Good, good. The general laughed and rushed into the room. My wife, thank you for your hard work. The general picked up the baby as he said. At this moment, Lin Ming's consciousness entered the child's body uncontrollably. Haha, my dear, look quickly. My son stopped crying the minute he's in my arms. Good, good. The general burst into laughter again when he saw the child stop crying. General, please lower your voice. Don't frighten our child, the general's wife who was lying on the bed said. Yes, yes, yes. I'm used to leading soldiers to war, but my child is definitely not afraid of his father's voice, right? The general looked at the child in his arms and said seriously, why am I in another world again? And why is it that I'm in the body of a baby that has just been born? Lin Ming frowned. Don't cry, don't cry. Looking at the child in his arms who frowned, the general thought that the baby was going to start crying again. Lin Ming, of course, would not cry. With this, under the protection of the general, Lin Ming spent his childhood. In this world, there was no such thing as cultivation. Everyone had to go through the natural process of living, growing old, getting sick, and dying. The general brought Lin Ming onto the battlefield just after he had reached the age of 13. Lin Ming had just entered the battlefield, but he had already displayed an astonishing military advisor ability. With just 5,000 troops, Lin Ming had defeated 50,000 enemy troops. When that happened, Lin Ming was only 14 years old. Furthermore, Lin Ming had been extremely strong since he was young. In battle, he was even more valiant. When he was 15 years old, he brought 500 men and directly captured the enemy's leader. As time passed, Lin Ming's deeds became more and more famous. When Lin Ming was 16 years old, he was given the title Admiral Fingling. It could be said that at the age of 16, Lin Ming had already surpassed the old generals who had fought on the battlefields for decades. Child, I'm afraid it will be difficult for you to have a long life if you stand out too much. I suggest that you restrain yourself. The general looked at his son and couldn't help but sigh. Anyone would be extremely excited to have such battle achievements. After all, Lin Ming's achievements at the age of 16 had already surpassed the battle achievements of many famous generals. However, as an old general who had fought on the battlefield for many years, he understood that Lin Ming had obtained such achievements with his lifespan as the price. My lifespan will only be 23 years. My battle achievements are the least of my worries. Of course, if I don't do anything in my life and don't enter the battlefield, I might live past 30 years old. But will you be more willing to see me do nothing with my life? Or would you rather I live a short but significant life? Lin Ming asked, looking at the general. Either way, even if you don't go on the battlefield, you will only be able to live for 30 years. If you do enter the battlefield, you will probably die in your 20s. I guess it doesn't matter then. The general sighed and waved his hand. Thank you for understanding. Due to his reasons, Lin Ming had never called the general father. Hal. The general waved his hand helplessly. Although he felt helpless and heartbroken, there was nothing he could do. When Lin Ming was 20 years old, what's going on? The general was celebrating Lin Ming's victory when Lin Ming returned with another outstanding battle achievement, but Lin Ming had a sudden nosebleed that couldn't be stopped at all. Someone. Even the emperor was panicking. This was because Lin Ming was the sharp sword of his empire. As long as Lin Ming was around, his empire could expand infinitely. Furthermore, with Lin Ming around, he could also defend his vast empire. Get the imperial physician here now. The emperor stood up and shouted. Ming'er, are you all right? When Lin Ming came to, his eyes met a concerned lady. This lady was the mother of this baby that he had possessed when he came to this world. I'm fine. Lin Ming stood up, shook his head, and said. It seemed that the backlash had arrived. Even in this world, Lin Ming could still cultivate. But Lin Ming chose not to. He wanted to experience the natural process of birth, aging, getting sick, and death. If he did cultivate, such a restriction wouldn't be able to restrain Lin Ming at all. Ming'er, your father said that you can only live to be 23 years old. Is it true? Just as Lin Ming was about to leave the room, a sorrowful voice appeared from behind. I do have this premonition. Lin Ming turned his head and said. Ming'er, I know that you have your thoughts. I even think that this 23-year-old is just the limit that you set for yourself. Ming'er, your father and I only have you as a child. You mustn't do anything rash. The lady continued to speak. I understand. Lin Ming nodded and said. I'm off. Lin Ming rode on his warhorse and said. Are you going to war again? The general looked at Lin Ming. When he raised his hand, he knew that he was getting old. My dear subordinate, why don't you rest for a while? Even the emperor, who loved expanding his territory, could not help but speak. He did not want this sharp sword to be broken so soon. There's no need. Even till the last moment. I will fight for the emperor and expand our territory. Lin Ming shook his head. The last moment, Ming'er, you. Hearing these words, even the emperor was flustered. Don't worry. This time, I will return safely. After saying these words, Lin Ming urged the warhorse under his feet and entered the battlefield again. This time, Lin Ming attacked the enemy camp and captured many of the neighboring kings alive. The empire's territory expanded once again. Lin Ming returned triumphantly once again. Good. The emperor of the empire even wanted to applaud Lin Ming. Titles and land for you. The emperor declared loudly. Your Majesty, may I ask, how old will I be this year? Lin Ming asked the emperor. This year, you will be 23 years old. Tomorrow is your birthday. Haha, I remember it clearly. The emperor laughed loudly. I will celebrate your birthday for you tomorrow. The emperor promised. Your Majesty, in the future, I'm afraid I won't be able to fight for you anymore. As for my birthday tomorrow, I wish to celebrate it at home. Your Majesty, please grant me my wish. Just my parents and me, 3 people are enough. Lin Ming lowered his head and spoke. My dear subordinate, what are you talking about? The emperor was stunned for a moment. Could it be that because of his outstanding military achievements, he was starting to have other thoughts? Although Lin Ming was only 23 this year, he possessed the military talent that others could not possess, as well as extremely high prestige. It could be said that Lin Ming possessed the ability to rebel. Your Majesty, there is no need to think too much about my words. It's just that I can feel that my end is coming, and thus for my last birthday, I would like to spend it quietly. I hope your Majesty will grant me my wish. Lin Ming kept his head lowered as he continued. My beloved subordinate, what are you saying? You must not speak nonsense. Hearing Lin Ming's words, the emperor's thoughts were completely in a mess. I am very tired today. I shall take my leave. Lin Ming cupped his fists and left. Ming'er, what you said just now. The general could not even manage to finish his sentence before tears immediately gushed out. Forgive me, I can't accompany you during your old age, Lin Ming said apologetically. I was a middle-aged man when I had you. I can already be considered to be in my old age. The general wiped his tears and said. But can you tell me how you predicted your lifespan? The general asked. Sigh. Lin Ming sighed. I have fought for so many years on the battlefield and have gained impressive achievements. I'm afraid I'm suffering a backlash now, Lin Ming said. Don't tell your mother about this, understand? The general said. Yes, Lin Ming nodded. The next day, snow suddenly fell from the sky. Lin Ming raised his head. This year's winter was particularly cold. Young general, you're awake? Seeing Lin Ming standing outside the door, the maid quickly bowed. Yes. Lin Ming looked at the heavy snow. He hadn't slept for the whole night. Winter this year is really cold. The snow is really heavy too. The general walked out of his room as well. He also hadn't slept for the whole night. If you leave behind a descendant, you can be considered to have done all you could for your parents, the general suddenly said. Father, don't joke around. Lin Ming waved his hand and said. The cold snow will drift past, Lin Ming said softly. General, young general, the birthday banquet is ready, a maid said as she walked forward. All right. The general strode forward. This year's birthday banquet was different from previous years. In the previous years, the emperor would personally host Lin Ming's birthday banquet. On top of that, the emperor would prepare for it very much in advance every year. It could be said that all the civil and military officials would suck up to Lin Ming at this time. However, during those banquets, Lin Ming acted like an outsider. The general and his wife were the only ones accompanying Lin Ming on his birthday this year. There were also a few servants. Come and sit. Lin Ming looked at the servants around him and said. We wouldn't dare. The servants around quickly waved their hands and didn't dare to sit with Lin Ming. One had to know that only the emperor had the right to sit beside Lin Ming. Tell them to come and sit, Lin Ming said to the general. Come on then. The servants dare not to disobey the general's order. You don't have to be so cautious. There's no need to be nervous. We are all human beings. This is true in every aspect. Human beings should not be divided by hierarchies. It is the concept of this era that is binding you. Who decided that the nobles are more valuable and respectable than any other human being anyway? At this moment, Lin Ming looked at everything in this world and was somewhat reluctant to part with it. After all, Lin Ming had stayed in this world for 23 years. You guys can also have exciting lives, Lin Ming smiled and said. Normally, Lin Ming would not say so much, but these servants had served him for more than 20 years. As such, moments before he would leave this world, Lin Ming still decided to say these words that would shatter many other concepts. After all, the one who was restraining oneself was none other than oneself. Today, let's drink and have fun together. Lin Ming raised the wine glass in his hand and said. At this time, the servants were very grateful for Lin Ming's words. I still need to apologize to you. No matter how strong Lin Ming's battle record was, he was still an ordinary person. After a few cups of wine, he got a little drunk. All right, Miner, you don't have to say any more. I know that you don't belong to this world, and it's time to let you go. The lady's tears streamed down her face and her voice was hoarse. Lin Ming let out a breath and stood up shakily. He knew that the lady had sincere feelings for him. There's no need to say any more. Today, at least be happy, the general said as well. I really don't want to leave. Lin Ming sat on the ground with a wine glass in his hand as he said. The wine glass in his hand shook. Lin Ming was aware that as long as he wished for his original strength, he could instantly return to the peak of his strength. And as soon as Lin Ming recovered to the peak of his strength, the restraints on his body could no longer pose any threat to him. However, Lin Ming still closed his eyes. This was the test for Lin Ming. This was the natural way of life, and the righteous path of life was filled with vicissitudes. Since he was in this world, Lin Ming would follow the rules of this world. Minner. As Lin Ming closed his eyes, a miserable cry sounded. In the end, I still have to leave. Lin Ming said one last sentence before entering complete darkness. Admiral Fingling has passed. As Lin Ming closed his eyes, the entire empire fell into a state of panic. My beloved subordinate, my most beloved subordinate. When the emperor heard this news, he stumbled into Lin Ming's memorial hall. I thought you were joking with me. I didn't expect. Regardless of whether the emperor was worried that Lin Ming was having second thoughts, his feelings for Lin Ming weren't fake. The entire nation was in mourning. However, Lin Ming couldn't see any of this. Because the current Lin Ming had entered another world once again. This time, Lin Ming had not reincarnated as a baby. Instead, he had reincarnated into the body of a man who had been bullied to death. So the power used in this world is called combat energy. After obtaining this man's memories, Lin Ming understood that this world was not a world of mortals. The power in this world was something called combat energy. He's alive again. Seeing that Lin Ming had come back from the dead, a black-robed man frowned. This kid is really hard to kill, another black-robed man beside him said. So what if he's hard to kill? Either way, his strength is so weak, we can just kill him again. The black-robed man sneered and attacked Lin Ming again. Break! Lin Ming's understanding of strength could be said to have reached the extreme. Regardless of whether it was magic or combat energy, the essence was the same. Lin Ming directly controlled this body and broke through. How is this possible? He actually broke through to become a combat sovereign at this time. This black-robed person broke out in cold sweat. He was fearful, because Lin Ming had broken through to quite a high tier within such a short period. Run. Bedtime trick melts belly and leg fat, shocks doctor's mega slim body even if they had the advantage in numbers. They were no longer a match for him. Run? Lin Ming laughed coldly. Since he had entered this body, he would take revenge for this body. Die. Lin Ming directly unleashed his strength and killed the group of black-robed people. People from the Hall of Souls? Lin Ming took their waste tokens and learned which faction they belonged to. Someone actually dared to kill our people. A cold voice sounded from the Hall of Souls. Destroy him. The scene of the black-robed men being killed was reconstructed, and Lin Ming's appearance was made into a portrait. This world is quite interesting, Lin Ming closed his eyes and said after reading through all of his memories. At this moment, Lin Ming was surrounded. The person in the middle of the encirclement was an expert at the combat sovereign tier. Bang! The battle between the two sides began. In just a jiffy, Lin Ming took all of their lives. The strength of a combat sovereign is actually about the same as that of a tier 8 mage. With this discovery, Lin Ming frowned. In this world, there is the legendary combat emperor. They should have about the same strength as a god tier. Lin Ming said thoughtfully. That's not right. If this is the case, something's off. Suddenly, Lin Ming felt an intense pain in his head. If this is the case, everything will be in chaos. Lin Ming held his head and said, Can a combat emperor surpass the strength of a god tier? Lin Ming muttered to himself. Is this world a world of a higher dimension? No. Lin Ming stood up. A god tier should surpass a combat emperor. Yes, that's right. Who? Lin Ming exhaled and once again stabilized his thoughts. There's a problem with these memories. Lin Ming said. Lin Ming realized that the memory of this body was trying to make him confused. At this moment, the sage tier experts watched as Lin Ming's body that was missing a head started to tremble violently. If you try to confuse me, I'll erase you, Lin Ming spoke coldly. As Lin Ming erased the faulty memories, his body stopped trembling. It seems that Lin Ming has entered a new fortuitous encounter, Gandalf said. As sage tier experts, they could see through many things. They knew that Lin Ming had entered a fortuitous encounter once more, and that he would be able to gain a lot from this fortuitous encounter. The things he could gain would probably be something that even sages like them couldn't obtain. We might as well take this opportunity to refine Lin Ming's body again, Dong King said. As the most experienced sage tier expert, he naturally thought in longer terms. All right. Gandalf nodded. With this, all the sage tier experts around immediately made their preparations. Even if there were some underworld sages who had the urge to be disloyal, but their unloyal thoughts had now all been dispelled. Seeing that Lin Ming was able to enter another fortuitous encounter even under such circumstances, they could not help but trust Lin Ming. Where should we start? A sage asked. Let's use our power together and start from the same position. They were all united in this plan. Let's start from his fingers. After their discussion, they decided to start from Lin Ming's finger. Other than the 3 underworld sages who weren't here, every sage from both the above-ground world and the underworld were here. They were working together to refine Lin Ming's body. This kind of treatment was unique. Although Lin Ming's current body had been refined and reformed several times, being refined by so many sages at the same time would still bring him unimaginable benefits. Even one cell in Lin Ming's body would be perfect. No one knew what benefits Lin Ming could gain in the end. After all, this was the first time such a situation had happened. At this moment, Lin Ming was still in his reincarnated body. All the faulty memories had been completely erased by Lin Ming. Everything that was trying to confuse him had been erased. Kill him! Suddenly, Lin Ming was surrounded. You people of the Hall of Souls are so overbearing, Lin Ming coldly snorted. Today will be the day of your death. Who gave you the guts to kill the people from the Hall of Souls? The combat sovereign said coldly in front of Lin Ming. Tesk, so it's fine if your people kill me, but I deserve death if I fight back. Well, according to this logic, I should just let my life be taken by the Hall of Souls, Lin Ming sneered as he looked at the few people in front of him. This is the truth. You were merely lucky to break through to the combat sovereign tier at the last minute, but I have long been at the peak of the combat sovereign class. Die. The opponent's combat sovereign directly attacked. Tusk tusk, let me show you whose death anniversary it will be today. Lin Ming moved forward and received the attack from the peak combat sovereign head-on. Today, I will destroy the Hall of Souls. A flame appeared in Lin Ming's hand that simply melted the body of the combat sovereign. Seeing that Lin Ming had directly killed a peak combat sovereign, the other people from the Hall of Souls revealed expressions of disbelief. Lin Ming, who had just entered the combat sovereign tier and was just a beginner combat sovereign, had actually directly killed a peak combat sovereign. Die. Lin Ming looked at the few remaining subordinates of the Hall of Souls with cold eyes and directly attacked. The opponent could not resist at all. They were killed by Lin Ming in an instant. The lot of you took away the souls of the people you killed, right? Even if I say you're beasts, I feel that I'm insulting the beasts. Lin Ming snorted coldly and his body directly disappeared from the spot. Following Lin Ming's disappearance, he appeared at the main entrance of the Hall of Souls headquarters in the next second. It should be known that the Hall of Souls was everywhere in this world. However, very few people knew where the headquarters of the Hall of Souls was. That being said, when one reached the combat sovereign tier, one could learn quite some secrets. Lin Ming had found the headquarters of the Hall of Souls based on what he had learned. Bang! Lin Ming stomped down and the entire Hall of Souls collapsed. Who is it? Following Lin Ming's attack, a few furious roars appeared. The person who will take your lives, Lin Ming sneered. The Hall of Souls has quite a sum of vengeful souls. Lin Ming casually released all of the vengeful souls here. You're courting death. The owners of the furious roars surrounded Lin Ming. A combat sovereign. Ha, a mere combat sovereign actually dares to come to the Hall of Souls and behave atrociously? A combat saint said coldly. Be careful. This fellow's strength doesn't seem to be a mere combat sovereign. The firmness of the Hall of Souls is not something that a combat sovereign can break. That's right. This fellow should be hiding his strength. Even the protection array of the Hall of Souls can only be broken by a combat saint. Another combat saint said as such. Why are you saying so much nonsense? Lin Ming sneered and continued, do you dare to accept the challenge? You're dawdling too much. Lin Ming's words had completely infuriated the few people who had calmed down after much difficulty. No matter what his strength is, let's join hands and destroy him. There were only a few combat saints in this world. They did not believe that Lin Ming could withstand their joint attack. Go! 15 types of mutated seeds of flame appeared in Lin Ming's hand. The mutated seed of flame ranked first had yet to be fused with Lin Ming, so Lin Ming could now only control a total of 15 types. How can there be so many mutated seeds of flame? The few combat saints were taken aback. Mutated seeds of flame were the most precious thing in this world. However, Lin Ming had so many on him. Moreover, they were all ranked at the top. Some were not even known in this world. Die! Lin Ming sneered. He fused all 15 types of the mutated seeds of flame before detonating them. Lin Ming's figure immediately disappeared. The few combat saints who hadn't come to their senses were directly bombarded and were badly injured. 2. All of them vomited blood. Lin Ming's figure appeared once again. Who exactly are you? This time, their voices were hoarse when they made this inquiry. Quickly inform the Great Elder. A combat saint shouted. I'll cover the rear. All of the combat saints knew that they were no match for Lin Ming. Now they could only choose to abandon one person. Are you worthy of blocking me? With a sneer, Lin Ming said, Wheels of Wrath. The Wheels of Wrath appeared in Lin Ming's hand. Lin Ming killed the combat saint on the spot. Impossible. How can a combat saint die? In this world, combat saints could be said to be immortal. At least for now. No one could completely kill a combat saint. Lin Ming was an exception. Lin Ming's power burned the opponent's soul into nothingness. You want to leave? Lin Ming's figure appeared in front of the few combat saints who wanted to escape. Die. Lin Ming said coldly. The few combat saints couldn't even fight back before being killed by Lin Ming's power. Currently, the strongest power in the Hall of Souls was only the combat saints. At this moment, among the Soul clan who had formed the Hall of Souls, someone stood up. Why is this day suddenly here? That figure said with some surprise. He had a premonition that he was about to break through to the combat emperor tier. However, Lin Ming's sudden appearance had made him be at a loss. At this moment, he did not have the time to think too much. When Lin Ming's figure once again appeared, he was in the main hall of the Soul clan. Soul Emperor, come out. Lin Ming's voice resounded over the entire Soul clan. I will definitely kill you. The Soul Emperor did not have much time to consider his options at this moment. I have once calculated from my predictions that I shouldn't leave the mountain today. However, I have also predicted that I will be able to break through to the Combat Emperor class. The Soul Emperor said encouraging words to himself to boost his confidence. He needed to do so, because he could sense that quite a few combat saints from the family had been killed by Lin Ming. Even an advanced combat saint had been killed by Lin Ming. Hence, the Soul Emperor felt a lot of pressure in facing Lin Ming. Die! All the mutated seeds of flame within Lin Ming's body engulfed the Soul Emperor. The battle lasted for an entire day and night. In the end, the Soul Emperor was killed by Lin Ming. With this, the entire world began to collapse. This was because Lin Ming had passed the final trial of this world. Everything, including everything in this world, is just an illusion in my mind. However, this illusion is different from the other illusions because I can enter reincarnation through this illusion. I might as well continue my journey of reincarnation. Lin Ming looked at the collapsing world and closed his eyes. When Lin Ming opened his eyes again, he found himself on a training ground. At this moment, Lin Ming was trying to stimulate his companion soul. Lin Ming's companion soul was a stalk of grass. Lin Ming began to reincarnate non-stop. He experienced all kinds of lives and all kinds of battles. There were also all kinds of cultivations, all kinds of systems, and so on. The benefits that these experiences brought to Lin Ming were too great. Lin Ming was growing with lightning speed within the illusion. This fortuitous encounter could be said to have put his soul through nirvana once more. Not only that, the process of nirvana was never-ending. The refining of his soul was much more difficult than that of his physical body. It was unknown how many times he had reincarnated and how many times he had been reborn. Finally, Lin Ming's physical body began to change. Lin Ming's body was placed within the palace. It's been 3 years. The Sage tier experts had been guarding Lin Ming's body for 3 whole years. Anyone else would have felt that this period was very long, and they might have even given up on Lin Ming. However, such a period was quite short for the sages. Firstly, their lifespans were exceptionally long. Furthermore, each time they entered cultivation, it could easily take more than a dozen years. Even if it took decades, it was normal. Their refinement of Lin Ming's body hadn't stopped within the 3 whole years as well. Now, there was no war between the above-ground world and the underworld. All the sages were working together to protect Lin Ming. He's moving. At this moment, Lin Ming's body finally began to change. Lin Ming's head began to slowly regenerate. He's finally back. Gandalf let out a deep breath and said. The regeneration of Lin Ming's head was quick. In the blink of an eye, Lin Ming was standing. Thank you, seniors, for protecting me. It's been hard on all of you these past few days. Lin Ming cupped his fists and said. There's no need to be so courteous. A Sage tier expert next to him hurriedly waved his hand. When, suddenly, a surge of power appeared within Lin Ming's body. Lin Ming hurriedly sat cross-legged on the ground and closed his eyes. His body was surrounded by a surge of power. It was as if he was encased in an egg. Boom! After a few more days, Lin Ming broke through. Lin Ming's aura changed again. Although Lin Ming was still at tier 10, the changes he had undergone were drastic. Break! Lin Ming said. Lin Ming's dark magic broke through with Lin Ming's words, directly reaching the peak. Does he have the power of a sage? Seeing that Lin Ming could break through the barrier of his tier with just one word, Gandalf couldn't help but be curious. Lin Ming, are you about to break through to the Sage tier? Yes. If I want to, I can directly enter the Sage tier. Lin Ming nodded. He didn't hide this fact. But I just broke through to tier 10. I don't want to continue breaking through so quickly. Lin Ming continued. Are you worried that your foundation might be unstable? You don't have to though. We're here. A few sages spoke up. If the current Lin Ming could break through to Sage tier, it would mean that they were one step closer to breaking through to God tier. It's not because of my foundation. Right now, even though I've just broken through to tier 10, my magic foundation, soul, consciousness, and so on are all extremely stable. It wouldn't be a problem for me to advance my dual element magic now either, Lin Ming said. Even though Lin Ming had just broken through to tier 10, but it could be stated firmly that Lin Ming's foundation surpassed all tier 10 mages. It was the same for both elements. As for his experience, being reincarnated so many times, Lin Ming had gone through a lot of time and many lives in the illusion. He could now see through the emptiness of the material world. However, Lin Ming still wanted to wait for the right chance to break through. Seniors, Thank you for being so concerned, Lin Ming spoke again. I will break through soon, but not now, Lin Ming continued. We understand. All the sage tier mages nodded. They knew that Lin Ming wasn't spouting nonsense. In their eyes, whatever Lin Ming had said, including his statement that he could break through to the sage tier now, was absolutely true. Seniors, I need to meditate now, Lin Ming said, but trailed off mid-sentence. All right, we understand. After hearing Lin Ming's words, all of the sages stood up and left. They understood what Lin Ming meant. After the sages left, Lin Ming disappeared on the spot. Lin Ming entered the stupa and closed his eyes, immersing himself in the spirit pool. Lin Ming's strength had reached a point where every single cell in his body was impeccable. It wasn't an exaggeration to call Lin Ming's current body the most perfect physical body to ever exist. Even a sage tier expert's physical body couldn't surpass Lin Ming's. Submerging himself in the spirit pool, every single cell in Lin Ming's body began to revolve on its own. Lin Ming's power also became extremely pure. Pooh! Lin Ming let out a breath. The exhale alone contained powerful magical elements. The current Lin Ming was like an extremely pure magical element. Now, I still need to take the final step to break through to the sage tier, Lin Ming said. He closed his eyes, and 16 types of mutated seeds of flame appeared. In Lin Ming's brain, there was also a burning seed of flame. Within his internal organs, arms, and palms, mutated seeds of flame burned. I should take a trip to the underworld first. At this moment, Lin Ming was feeling inexplicably uneasy, a premonition that something was about to happen in the underworld. Let's settle this matter first. Lin Ming made sure everything in his body was where he needed them to be, and left the stupa. I'll go alone. Lin Ming prepared to head to the underworld on his own. Although there were many underworld sages around, and it would be extremely convenient for Lin Ming to bring any of them along, Lin Ming still chose to go alone. After all, there were too few that Lin Ming could trust. Although these sages seemed to be treating him extremely well, he was aware it was only because he could break through to the god tier and lead them into the god tier. If there was an even greater temptation present, Lin Ming believed that they would definitely have other thoughts. It was best if he went alone. Without the existence of the demon god, Lin Ming couldn't directly appear in the underworld. If he took the passageway, his every move would probably be monitored. Even if Lin Ming was powerful now, he still couldn't withstand the prize of many eyes. Oh right, the power of the god of fire. Lin Ming suddenly remembered that he still had some leftover power of the god of fire. In any case, for Lin Ming, as long as the power could allow him to go to the underworld undetected, it was enough. He believed that no one would dare to stop him on his return even if he swaggered. Pass. With this, Lin Ming directly entered the underworld from the above-ground world. This time he arrived in a small village as well. In the small village, there were no longer any signs of human activity. There wasn't even a single magical beast or animal here, let alone women, children, the old or the young. Lin Ming frowned and headed in another direction. An underworld sage had given Lin Ming a map when he surrendered to show his sincerity. On the map, even a tree was marked. When Lin Ming arrived at another village, he found it to be empty as well. Lin Ming couldn't believe what he was seeing and went to another larger village. After arriving, there was not the slightest hint that there was anyone around. This? Lin Ming frowned. Of course, he knew what this meant. Everyone in these villages must have been sacrificed. Those sons of a B***tch, seriously, calling them that is an insult to dogs. Lin Ming said through gritted teeth. So many innocent lives, regardless of age, regardless of their situations, all of them were sacrificed. Furthermore, they had been sacrificed to a living dead. Seeing and knowing all this made Lin Ming feel as if his chest was stuffed with anger, but he had no way of venting it out. There are still some villages. Lin Ming looked at the map and quickly arrived at the next village. It's also empty. Are they crazy? One had to know that this map was a real-time map. In other words, the people of these villages had just been brought away as sacrifices. Minutes before Lin Ming arrived, there were still people in this village. There's still one last village. Lin Ming looked at the map. It was the last village in the vicinity. Let's go. Lin Ming had just arrived when he suddenly heard a berating voice. Within the village, regardless of whether it was women, children, old or young, they were all escorted to a commuting spiritual treasure that could carry a huge number of people at the same time. Of course, there were quite some villagers who were unable to withstand the speed and the situation, but the sons of a B***tch did not have any care about such things. To them, As long as the villagers were left with their last breath and could be sacrificed, they had done their job. Stop! Lin Ming's voice resounded throughout the area. Above this spiritual treasure were more than a dozen innocent villagers. It was just so that Lin Ming arrived at the perfect time. After all, after they captured the villagers, they were going to sacrifice them. Who are you? How dare you resist the king's order? I see you are a mage with noble status. Why are you getting involved in this mess? A soldier asked Lin Ming. King? Who does he think he is? And you guys, what makes you think you are so high and mighty? Are you going to slaughter ordinary people? Lin Ming looked at the soldiers coldly and asked. It's been so many years since the hierarchy has been set. Even if you bring it up now, there's no way to solve it. One of the soldiers sighed and said. Don't talk nonsense with him. It's the king's order, he wouldn't dare to attack us. The other soldier snorted and said. King? Who does he think he is? Die. Flames appeared in Lin Ming's hands, and he directly killed the soldier who spoke. Help! Following Lin Ming's attack, the originally non-villagers finally reacted and knelt to the ground. How dare you! The soldiers originally thought that Lin Ming was just enjoying playing hero. After all, in the underworld, no one below the sage tier dared to go against a sage. A sage tier expert was king, his word absolute. Not only do I dare, but I will also kill that so-called god tier great elder in that spirit pool. Lin Ming snorted. Die! Lin Ming raised his hand, and all the soldiers were instantly wiped out by Lin Ming. Benefactor, benefactor. As Lin Ming made his move, the villagers burst into tears. If I let you go now, all of you will die. Lin Ming looked at them, sighed, and said. I might as well take you away. As Lin Ming said this, he gathered all of them into the stupa. Lin Ming wasn't a compassionate person, but he felt that regardless of his thoughts towards the matter, he couldn't just stand by and watch. Lin Ming could not stand to see so many innocent lives being sacrificed. He also would not allow the so-called god-tier great elder to be awakened like this. Although the god-tier great elder had been sealed, it was possible for him to be awakened if so many innocent lives were sacrificed to break the seal. There were so many lives here. Although the great elder was sealed, a seal left the possibility of being broken. Unless he killed the great elder directly, there was still a chance for him to awaken. However, even if Lin Ming's current strength was extremely powerful, in the face of a god-tier expert, even if it was merely a slumbering god-tier expert, Lin Ming would still be unable to kill him. Even the remaining soul of the demon god was unable to kill this god-tier great elder. Otherwise, it wouldn't have just been a seal. So this is why I've been feeling so uneasy, Lin Ming said with a frown. It turned out that the 3 sage-tier experts from the underworld were once again plotting this matter. There's a way to solve this. After lowering his head to ponder, Lin Ming thought of a solution. The sages in the above-ground world might not necessarily act to stop this matter. Even if some did, some wouldn't care. After all, to them, as long as it was beneficial for them, they would be fine with anything. They didn't care about the lives of ordinary humans at all. Then Lin Ming would make them care. Now, I need to find the families of the sage-tier experts that aren't in the city. Lin Ming pondered for a moment before speaking. As long as the sage's family members were sacrificed as well, they wouldn't be able to just sit idly by. After all, if it didn't hurt them, they would just stand aloof, but the minute it interfered with their interests, they wouldn't remain calm. Lin Ming quickly bound the sage's important family members who were outside the city. In any case, these people had many innocent lives in their hands too, so Lin Ming didn't feel any psychological pressure to bind and sacrifice them at all. Lin Ming had completely crippled their powers, and he had also crippled their ability to speak. Right now, these people were like deaf mutes among the ordinary villagers. At this point, their minds weren't quite sane either. If they were captured by the soldiers definitely wouldn't be able to tell that these were the descendants of sage-tier experts. Lin Ming placed them in the nearest village. The sage's family members were quickly captured and sacrificed. Of course, the underworld sage-tier magical beast had quickly rushed over to investigate the matter of the killing of the soldiers. However, it was clueless about Lin Ming's appearance. After dealing with the soldiers, Lin Ming used dark magic to destroy any trace of evidence. Damn, it's really chaotic. Now that there are only the 3 of us sages in the underworld, there are more and more brave people. The sage-tier magical beast said with a frown. What he was thinking was that the underworld sages were all by Lin Ming's side in the above-ground world, thus they could no longer control the people below. At this time, Many of the Sage tier families had discovered that their family's elders or important members had disappeared after leaving the city. And now, their gazes fell on the final spot where these people had disappeared. They were taken away by soldiers. However, the matter had once again become ridden with suspicions. Sage tier families had special privileges. These soldiers shouldn't have dared to make a move against them. But even though this matter was suspicious, they still had to investigate the disappearance of the important members of their family. After all, the Sage tier family had always had the highest status. Now that their family members had disappeared, if they didn't look for them, they would have nowhere to place their pride. As for the Sage tier great elder of each of the families, although they were in the above-ground world, it wasn't like they were dead. As long as their Sage tier great elders were alive, they would always have the confidence to be high and mighty. Moreover, it wasn't just a sparse few great elders who went to the above-ground world. Other than the 3 Sage tier experts in the center of power, all the sages had gone to the above-ground world. Within the 3 that were still in the underworld, 2 had been forced to return by Lin Ming. If Lin Ming was willing to take them now, at least 2 of the 3 would follow Lin Ming to the above-ground world. Find out what's going on. All of the families whose important members had disappeared began to investigate. And without exception, the result was that their family members had been taken away by soldiers. Why were they taken away by the soldiers? Why didn't the soldiers reveal their identities before doing anything? Also, why were their family members unable to resist the soldiers? Why were there no signs of fighting? All this was unknown. Lin Ming did all this based on something he had discovered. The soldiers had spiritual treasures that could suppress mages and the other professions. These spiritual treasures contained the power of the 3 underworld sages, at the center of power. Right now, whatever these 3 sages were doing could be considered to be almost crazy. Thus, they must have caused some powerful people to be dissatisfied. In addition, almost all of the sages had left the underworld for the above-ground world, leaving these 3 sages who were acting crazily. Many couldn't help but start thinking. Thus, more and more people like Lin Ming began to resist. This was why the soldiers suddenly had spiritual treasures that could suppress others in their hands. This gave Lin Ming an opportunity to take advantage of it. As they investigated further, the Sage tier families also found out about the spiritual treasures. Thus, from their point of view, the important members of their family must have been suppressed after they left the city. After all, no one would place their attention on Lin Ming right now. On one hand, no one had noticed Lin Ming's arrival. On the other hand, Lin Ming's status was too high. He was an existence that even the great elders of each Sage tier family were serving. As such, the Sage tier families placed their mutual hat on the 3 sages in the center of power. Reaching such a conclusion, the person in charge in each family immediately sent a message to each of their great elders from the underworld. In their message, it was said that the 3 sages were acting recklessly, and were even sacrificing the members of the Sage tier families. When the great elders received the news, they were naturally extremely furious. However, they had their considerations and didn't return to the underworld directly. Some had speculated that this was Lin Ming's doing, but no one delved too deeply into such a speculation. In the end, the underworld Sage tier experts gathered together and came to a consensus. They would return to the underworld to see for themselves what had happened. At this moment, Lin Ming, who had achieved his goal, found a place on the map. Other places were marked on the map. This place was also marked, but the mark was different. There was only a symbol to mark this place. It was a big red exclamation mark. There must be something about this place. From the symbol, one could tell that the place should be a forbidden area. Since I'm free, there might be a juncture for me to break through to the Sage tier there, Lin Ming said. Although Lin Ming was 1 foot in the Sage tier now, and he had also told the Sage tier experts that as long as he could break through as soon as he wanted to, but up until now, Lin Ming still hadn't made a breakthrough because he knew that it wasn't time for him to do so yet. It went without a doubt that Lin Ming had the strength and foundation to make a breakthrough. After all, even someone who had just broken through to the Sage tier wouldn't be able to have Lin Ming's foundation. However, he wanted to wait for a juncture. Only when a juncture appeared would Lin Ming choose to break through. Otherwise, even he broke through to the Sage tier, he would not be able to fully unleash the potential of the Sage tier. Of course, Lin Ming could break through to the Sage tier right now, but what about after that? There was still the God tier waiting for him. What one needed to break through to the God tier was not just the foundation that breaking through to the Sage tier required. He needed to have the strongest foundation no matter what tier he was at. Lin Ming couldn't just think about the present and ignore his future breakthroughs. At this point, he had a strong premonition that there was no juncture in the above-ground world for him to break through to the sage tier. This red exclamation mark gave Lin Ming a very strong feeling that this was the juncture for his breakthrough. Lin Ming arrived at the location at an extremely fast speed. Master, there are great dangers ahead. Please reconsider. Suddenly, Bloodseeker appeared. You can feel great dangers? Lin Ming frowned and asked. After so many encounters, it could be said that Lin Ming had experienced all kinds of storms. However, no matter how dangerous the situation was, Bloodseeker had never appeared to warn him. This time, to think that Bloodseeker actually appeared and said something like this to him, one could imagine how dangerous it would be. The surging of energy and blood in it is too great. Furthermore, the hatred that is erupting from it is even more frightening to me. Bloodseeker nodded. The reason why he was given this name was because of his sensitivity to blood. Therefore, he had bad premonitions about the place. It's all right, Lin Ming waved his hand. Since he had decided as such, he would continue forward. To Lin Ming, he would not turn back for anything. Yes, Bloodseeker nodded his head and entered the Wheels of Wrath. He knew that Lin Ming was the person who created miracles. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so loyal and reminded him. If it was before, he would have wished for his master to die tragically so that he could release backlash on his master. Lin Ming looked around and found that there was no sign of life in his surroundings. Buzz. Just as Lin Ming entered, he suddenly felt intense dizziness. Lin Ming took a deep breath and discarded the feeling. A voice sounded from deep within the place. The owner of the voice could see that Lin Ming's body was surging with power. He was no ordinary tier 10 mage. Thus, when he first attacked, he had increased his strength. He didn't expect that Lin Ming would be able to remove his influence in an instant. Is he a sage concealing his strength? The voice asked doubtfully. At this moment, Lin Ming had also noticed the abnormality. However, he had just entered the place, so he didn't act rashly. This place was terrifyingly quiet. In other places, there would be magical beasts and poisonous insects attacking him, but this place was different. There was nothing in here. Even the trees were withered, but none of them rot. This made everything in this place even eerier. The environment here was no longer suitable for living things since there had been no signs of life for a long time. The poison swelling in this place had even materialized. Lin Ming formed a layer of flame power around his body, burning the poison swelling around him. It could be said that he was feeling quite bored here. Walking in the area, there were muddy swamps everywhere. If it wasn't for Lin Ming's strong body, any ordinary mage would probably already be exhausted. Lin Ming had been walking for quite some time and distance, but he didn't discover anything. In this place, other than the muddy swamps, there were only the withered trees. Nine-headed worm. Lin Ming put the nine-headed worm in his hand. Master, the nine-headed worm looked around and started to tremble. The environment here made him feel a sense of oppression even with his bloodline. Is everything here an illusion? Lin Ming asked. The nine-headed worm was an expert in creating illusions, and it had a bloodline of the same tier as the dragon clan. If the place was an illusion, it would definitely be able to discover some signs. Master, I'm afraid, let's leave. This place is too dangerous. The moment the nine-headed worm opened its mouth, it actually spoke the same words as Bloodseeker, urging Lin Ming to leave this place as soon as possible. However, this aroused Lin Ming's interest. What kind of place was it that made the nine-headed worm, which had always been in a place like Mountain Wookiee, feel so afraid? Tell me what you feel. Lin Ming looked at the nine-headed worm and said, the illusion here is pieced together. It's fused with overlapping illusions and many different types of them too. It's very difficult to break such an illusion because even if one breaks a few layers, one may find themselves in another illusion. An existence that can create this kind of illusion is probably above the sage tier. The nine-headed worm said, above the sage tier? Doesn't that mean the person who created this illusion is a god tier expert? Lin Ming frowned. This place was created by a god tier expert? No wonder the sage that gave him the map had merely marked a red exclamation mark on the map. Yes, master. Although you are strong and powerful, it's still difficult for us to resist god-tier powers, the nine-headed worm said. It's only interesting because god-tier powers are involved. If it were only sage-tier powers, it would have been boring. Lin Ming stretched and said. To Lin Ming, sage-tier powers were no longer attractive. Only god-tier powers could tempt him now. Thus, Lin Ming's interest was piqued even more. If it wasn't god-tier, Lin Ming wouldn't have come. Master, you should reconsider. After hearing Lin Ming's words, the nine-headed worm pleaded, because it was feeling a fatal pressure. There's no need to reconsider. It's enough to just think it over once. Lin Ming waved his hand and said, I'll listen to you. The nine-headed worm sighed. It wasn't like it could refute Lin Ming's decision anyway. But to be honest, you should think twice. After all, you have 3 heads. Lin Ming smiled and said, Master, don't joke around, the nine-headed worm said with some hidden bitterness. At the moment, it wasn't in the mood to joke around with Lin Ming. You said that there are layers of illusions here and it's not just one single illusion, right? Lin Ming asked. Lin Ming was extremely interested in this kind of illusion. Yes, layers upon layers of illusions and dreams. One can say that here, it's impossible to distinguish between an illusion, a dream, or reality. The nine-headed worm nodded and said, You thought that you were in an illusion. Maybe your body didn't move and appeared in a dream. You thought you were in an illusion or a dream. Maybe you appeared in reality. That's the scary thing about this place. You didn't even know how you died. Maybe you were alive, and you thought you were dead. The scariest thing was that after the 2 saint-level experts from the underworld entered this place, there was no news at all. That's why there was a big exclamation mark in this place. This was a forbidden area. To everyone in this world, this was a forbidden area. This was because no one in either world could break through to the god tier. So you're saying that this soil is fake? The soil felt extremely real. The dripping water and muddy mud were all showing that it was soil. However, Lin Ming also knew that it was just mud. It was the lowest level of illusion. This mud should be real, the nine-headed worm said. Because there are no illusion and dream elements in this mud. The lowest level of the illusion of mud was fake. Tusk, then we need to find a place to wipe off the mud. Lin Ming looked at his palm with disdain. He placed his palm on a tree and wiped the mud on it. Hell, this kid did it on purpose. A cursing voice appeared as Lin Ming smeared the mud on the withered tree. Because Lin Ming smeared mud on his face. But no matter how one scrutinized closely, Lin Ming shouldn't have noticed anything amiss. This place is a little boring. Lin Ming continued forward. Here, other than the withered tree, there were only swamps. There was no life at all. Here, Lin Ming couldn't even fight. This kind of environment made Lin Ming extremely bored. There are so many dead trees here. Why don't we burn them all to make things livelier? Lin Ming smiled and said, I'll do it for fun. A flame in Lin Ming's hand appeared and directly burned the dead trees around him. Wow! The trees were ignited and turned into a pile of ash. This is interesting. Lin Ming chuckled as if he was experiencing the joy of childhood. Boom! Suddenly, flames descended from the sky and burned a huge area. All the withered trees around Lin Ming started to burn. There are still some swamps. It's too wet and too troublesome to walk. Just dry it, and it'll be flat, Lin Ming continued. Then 16 types of mutated seeds of flame were ignited, and this could be said to be the only blow they had suffered in so many years. After all, this place was extremely strange. Even if someone came in, they would be cautious and wouldn't dare to make too much of a commotion. And Lin Ming was the complete opposite. Lin Ming caused as much ruckus as he could. Why did Lin Ming do it? It was too boring. And as Lin Ming made his move, more curses were heard. Evidently, Lin Ming wasn't just trying to relieve his boredom. Such indiscriminate attacks would hit anyone who was in this place. One could still withstand it if it were any ordinary seed of flame or firepower. But Lin Ming was using the most powerful seed of flame. Not even a saint-level expert would be able to extinguish this seed of flame. No one wanted to take it head-on. Although more people were cursing, they were all cursing in their hearts. Thus, all Lin Ming could hear was the crackling of the raging flames. Master, this commotion will probably bring us big trouble, the nine-headed worm said with some worry. But his master was fearless. Lin Ming wouldn't listen to anything he said. I was just worried that trouble won't come. How boring would that be? Lin Ming lowered his head and said. He had been rushing here and was still in the illusion. How boring would that be? That would really be boring. You reminded me. Is it lively enough now? Lin Ming said. As Lin Ming spoke, an even more powerful and fierce flame descended once again. And this time, it was even larger. List of countries that have been eliminated from qualifier race. One could say that within a few kilometers, Lin Ming's flame power was everywhere. And as Lin Ming attacked once more, a few withered trees started running. Quick, look! The withered tree has turned into a spirit. Lin Ming pointed at a withered tree and joked. Nonetheless, his figure quickly appeared in front of the withered tree. Lin Ming's physical strength could be said to be abnormal. Even a level 10 berserker's physical strength was inferior to Lin Ming's after many years of training. Lin Ming grabbed the withered tree swiftly. It couldn't react at all. At this moment, the nine-headed worm finally understood the reason behind Lin Ming's large-scale attack and the ruckus he caused. Lin Ming had used the simplest and most violent method to force all of them out. "Where are you running to?" Lin Ming looked at the withered tree and asked. However, as Lin Ming grabbed the withered tree in his hand, the withered tree returned to its original state once again. "Tesk, do you take me for a fool?" Lin Ming snorted coldly and punched and kicked the withered tree ferociously. Lin Ming broke the withered tree's branches with just one punch, given his tremendous strength. "Spare me, spare me." Lin Ming's punch shattered the tree's courage, and its original form was revealed. It was just a silly-looking little fellow. And it was also adorable. This softened Lin Ming's heart. Against his first instinct, he used his life force and restored this little fellow's arm. "Who are you?" After being saved, this little fellow started taking advantage of Lin Ming's easygoingness and demanded, "You're talking to me with this tone. Do you want to have your arms and legs broken now?" Lin Ming coldly swept his gaze across this little guy, and his legs immediately started trembling. Lin Ming's aura was too powerful. "I haven't begun asking you, yet you're asking about me instead." Lin Ming snorted coldly. "Ask me what you wish to know. I know the most out of everyone here." The little guy patted his chest and quickly said, "Where is your headman?" Lin Ming asked. "I am the headman here." The little guy said. "That's bullshit. The standards of a headman are so low?" Lin Ming said coldly. Although this little fellow looked silly and cute, his strength had indeed reached tier 9. However, in a place like this where even a sage would be destroyed, this tier, which sounded pretty good in the outside world, was a bit lacking. "In this place, we shouldn't just consider our tiers," the little fellow didn't want to be outdone and said. "What a joke. If I don't consider your tier, should I look at your cute appearance then?" Lin Ming sneered and said. "You should consider my bloodline," the little fellow said. "Bloodline? What bloodline are you? Let me hear it." When Lin Ming heard this, he was even more interested. Was there a dynasty that belonged to him here? "I have a king-tier bloodline," the little fellow said proudly. "This is the best bloodline other than the emperor-tier bloodline." The little fellow spoke again. "Even a sage-tier expert whose bloodline isn't as high-tiered as mine can only bow down to me. In this place, bloodlines were the law. Even a sage-tier expert, whose bloodline wasn't high-tiered enough, could only be a lowly existence." "Does everyone have a bloodline?" Lin Ming asked. "Yes. In this place, every living being had its bloodline." "What about me then? What bloodline do I have?" Lin Ming asked the little fellow. "You have the slave-tier bloodline." The little fellow glanced at Lin Ming and said seriously. "The slave-tier bloodline? Haha, that's the funniest thing I've heard today." After hearing this, Lin Ming couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Then, with this slave-tier bloodline, should I bow down to you now?" Lin Ming looked at the little fellow and said, "No, no, no, I wouldn't dare." Feeling the terrifying pressure from Lin Ming, the little fellow hurriedly said, "Then, what you just said about the bloodline tiers, isn't that bullshit?" Lin Ming sneered. To say that even if one reached the sage tier, one still had to bow and obey others just because one's bloodline was not so high-tiered. Pure bullshit. Someone at the sage tier could kill the other party with a single finger, so why would he need to be respectful to him? "Sir, that's not the case. Here, the bloodline determines the amount of power of this place that one can mobilize. For example, the Emperor tier bloodline can mobilize all the power in this illusion, while the lowest tier, the slave tier bloodline, can only be mobilized." The little fellow said. "What is the power that you can mobilize with your king tier bloodline?" Lin Ming asked. "I can mobilize most of the power of the illusion," the little fellow said. "Oh? Then let me see it," Lin Ming said. He wanted to see how much power this little fellow could mobilize with whatever bullshit he had said. "Aren't you afraid?" The little fellow looked at Lin Ming and asked seriously. "Ha ha ha, what's there to be afraid of?" Lin Ming asked coldly. "If you really have such abilities, how could you be captured so easily by me?" Lin Ming asked. The little fellow had been captured by Lin Ming without any ability to resist. And now this little fellow was saying that he could mobilize most of the power in this place. How terrifying was this place? Even if his strength was formidable, he could only stir up the slightest ripple. All right, you said this yourself, the little fellow said angrily. He closed his eyes, and everything around him started to move. Boom! Suddenly, the scenery in front of Lin Ming changed, and a huge rock fell. The rock is fake, the nine-headed worm said, but Lin Ming still attacked, shattering the rock into pieces. It's solid inside. The nine-headed worm couldn't help but exclaim. The nine-headed worm was an expert in the art of controlling poisonous insects as well as creating illusions. Now that it had 3 heads, it had the strength of about tier 10. And this little fellow only had the strength of tier 9. Who would have thought that just a normal attack from the little fellow would be able to deceive the nine-headed worm? This little fellow seems to really be able to mobilize the power here. The nine-headed worm couldn't help but say, being able to mobilize the illusions is normal. Didn't you hear him say that he has a king tier bloodline? Lin Ming smiled as he spoke. All right, I know that you can control the power here. Stop, Lin Ming said. To make me do it when you ask me to and want me to stop when you ask me to, what do you take me for? This little fellow said coldly. Since Lin Ming had given him the chance to make a move, he wouldn't allow Lin Ming another chance to control him. Tusk tusk, you have quite the temper, Lin Ming smiled as flames spewed out from his hands. The surrounding moisture was directly evaporated, and the space was distorted. The illusion here was directly burned to reveal its true form. At least there was no illusion around Lin Ming. I'll count to 3, Lin Ming spoke. HMPH. More and more attacks appeared around Lin Ming. These attacks were illusions, dreams, and so on. Of course, there was also the power of reality. When these different types attacked at the same time, it was hard to defend against. However, Lin Ming didn't think much of it. Lin Ming's way of dealing with changes was to stay sure of himself. Regardless of whether it was illusions or real attacks, the power in Lin Ming's body was endless. Just come at him. In any case, Lin Ming didn't need to conserve his strength. It's time. Lin Ming leaped and it actually made a sonic boom. Lin Ming's speed made the little fellow shiver in fear. The minute Lin Ming's punch landed, the little fellow fell to the ground with a bang. This is an illusion. This little fellow that fell was an illusion. It doesn't matter, he won't be able to run far, Lin Ming smiled. Within Lin Ming's brain, flames burned. This was the mutated seed of flame that was ranked first. The power it possessed was absolutely formidable. However, the mutated seed of flame burning in Lin Ming's brain didn't seem to cause any harm to Lin Ming at all. This was because it was Lin Ming's mutated seed of flame, to begin with. In Lin Ming's eyes, flames were also rising. All the energy fluctuations in the surroundings could be clearly captured by Lin Ming. Here, Lin Ming moved forward and threw a punch into the air. Following Lin Ming's attack, a meatball landed on the ground. I gave you a chance. Lin Ming smiled and flicked at the little fellow's head. The pain made the little fellow grimace. Of course, Lin Ming did not intend to kill him. It was not because the little fellow was cute, but because the little fellow could really mobilize the power of this place. What kind of monster are you? You, the little guy, had just witnessed the strength of Lin Ming's physical body. One had to know that the little fellow had the king tier bloodline. Even a sage would not be able to find him with such speed. The current Lin Ming knocked him down with one attack. Furthermore, the flames in Lin Ming's eyes seemed to be able to burn through all the illusions in this space. If he could burn through all the illusions here, Lin Ming could be said to be an invincible existence in this place. This was because this place was formed from illusions to begin with. Whether it was the attacks, the power mobilized, and so on, they were all illusions. In fact, the real attacks were too weak. The reason why it could trap sages to death, and may even kill sages with attacks, was all thanks to the illusions. Now that Lin Ming could see through all the illusions, everything here was useless to Lin Ming. How did you mobilize the illusions here? Lin Ming asked. Just so. It's an innate ability, a little fellow said. An ability that comes with your bloodline? Lin Ming found the reason. Where is the creature with the Emperor tier bloodline here? Lin Ming asked. There is no creature with the Emperor tier bloodline here, the little fellow said. The highest tier here is the king tier bloodline, which was why the little fellow had said that he was the boss of this place. The little fellow had said it on the aspect of the bloodlines. However, from the aspect of strength, the little fellow's strength was really not on the list. There were many experts in this illusion, but those with king tier bloodlines were rare. Although there were many experts here, in this place of cultivation, those with the king tier bloodlines grew very quickly. In the illusory realm, the sage tier experts were all of king tier bloodlines. No one here has the Emperor tier bloodline? Lin Ming asked. Yes, but after reaching the Sage tier, the King tier bloodline will slowly awaken and will become purer and purer, the little fellow said. I understand, Lin Ming nodded. This illusory realm is where the God tier expert died, right? Lin Ming spoke. According to what those sages said, it should be so, the little fellow nodded and said. All of you were born from him, which is why you have different bloodlines, right? Lin Ming nodded in understanding of the origin of the bloodline tiers. Their bloodline tier was innate. That was because if they were to discuss this matter, these people in the illusory realm could be considered as the descendants of the God tier expert that died here. If they wanted to obtain the so-called Emperor tier bloodline, they would probably have to reach the God tier. At that time, they would probably no longer have their original consciousness. They would most likely be reborn as the previous God tier experts. Since you have the King tier bloodline, you must have the potential to grow into the Emperor tier bloodline. Lin Ming looked at the little fellow and said, Of course. I will be the first existence in the illusory realm to have the Emperor tier bloodline. The little fellow nodded. He believed firmly that he would achieve greatness in the future. Very well, I believe in you. I'll let you go, Lin Ming nodded and said. You. The little fellow didn't expect Lin Ming to let him go so easily. Bye-bye. Looking at the little fellow who didn't believe in him, Lin Ming waved his hand. This little guy ran away in a flash. He didn't dare to provoke Lin Ming anymore. After all, Lin Ming had completely ignored the existence of the illusory realm just now. Looks like this place isn't simple, Lin Ming said. To think that this place was a God tier ruin. There were huge opportunities in this place. At the very least, there would be an opportunity for Lin Ming to break through to the Sage tier. The reason why Lin Ming let that little fellow go was that he had gotten all the information that he wanted. Therefore, there was no need for Lin Ming to kill him. Whoosh! Suddenly, a sharp sword stabbed Lin Ming from behind. Lin Ming snorted and dodged the attack. Die! Flames appeared in Lin Ming's hand and landed on the culprit who attacked him. However, this person was just an illusion. It was apparent that the person who attacked him was much stronger than the little fellow. But this made it all the more interesting. Those who destroy the illusion will be killed without mercy. The culprit who attacked Lin Ming looked like an ancient general who was clad in golden armor. It's not an illusion. There really are humans in this place. Lin Ming could tell that the general was undoubtedly a human. Human. I'm a law enforcer now. The general frowned and said, Those who destroy the illusion will be killed without mercy. The general hollered again and attacked Lin Ming. No wonder it's hard to tell whether anything in this place is real or fake. Everything is indeed hidden too deeply. As he said this, Lin Ming simply killed the general. Although they were both tier 10 powerhouses, their strength couldn't be compared. Lin Ming had said those weird because he realized that the general was just a corpse. However, at the same time, the general was a real human too, and the strength he had was indeed a tier 10. Therefore, it was hard to tell whether anything in this place was real or fake. One of the law enforcers was killed. A cold snort appeared in the illusory realm. Although there were many strong people in this illusory realm, there were only a small number of tier 10 cultivators who could become law enforcers. On top of that, these law enforcers were tightly related with the owner of this place. Now that one of the law enforcers had died, the mastermind would naturally be the first to know. The guy who came in is quite powerful. If he can be controlled, he might be a good fighter. The mastermind said coldly. Go. With a casual wave of the mastermind's hand, 4 law enforcers swiftly headed toward Lin Ming's position. These 4 law enforcers were all more powerful than the previous general. Furthermore, they were all living beings with their consciousness. With their coordination in the use of illusions, they could even fight against Sage tier experts for quite some time. Master, the fluctuations here are a little abnormal, the 9-headed worm suddenly spoke. This is the place. It should be a connecting point of the illusory realm. After what had happened just now, the 9-headed worm had been paying close attention to the surroundings. It was now in its extreme meticulous observation mode. The connecting point of the illusory realm? Lin Ming frowned. Yes, it's the weakest point of the illusory realm. If you break through this place, you can see the most primitive world of the illusion. The 9-headed worm nodded. The space around them had melted during the battle just now. However, the space here was layered. Therefore, they couldn't find the most primitive world of the illusion. Now, if they broke the connection point, they could see the original appearance of this place. Because this position was the weakest point of the illusory realm. If Lin Ming were to make a move now, he would be able to break through the layers of illusions here. After all, his strength was formidable, and this was the weakest point in the illusory realm. If it were an ordinary tier 10 expert, he wouldn't have been able to break the illusory realm even though he was at the weakest point. As for the normal points of the illusory realm, even Sage realm experts wouldn't be able to break the illusion. If that were not the case, the illusory realm would not have become the burial grounds for Sage realm experts, nor would this place be marked as a forbidden place by so many sages. Stop! Just as Lin Ming was about to make a move, a berating voice sounded. HM! Lin Ming turned around with a frown. At this moment, 4 figures swiftly surrounded Lin Ming. They were 4 law enforcers. Do you have a death wish? Lin Ming looked at them and asked coldly. How dare you speak so shamelessly after intruding into our territory? Today, we will tear you into pieces. The 4 law enforcers began channeling their power. With this, the scenery around Lin Ming changed. The power of these 4 law enforcers far exceeded that of anyone Lin Ming had encountered just now. On top of that, their cooperation in attacking and the distribution of their power were flawless. Therefore, the illusory realm was starting to backfire on Lin Ming. Layers upon layers of illusions were never ending. The illusions themselves could cause dizziness and inability to stand, and the attacks made inside the illusory realm were countless and unable to be dodged. Lin Ming was completely trapped and was receiving all sorts of attacks. However, he didn't panic at all. No matter what kind of attacks came, he just needed to stay calm and adapt to the situation. Black Tortoise. Lin Ming said coldly. Master. As soon as Lin Ming spoke, Black Tortoise's figure appeared beside him. Block all the attacks, Lin Ming said. All right. Black Tortoise nodded, and a layer of defensive shield appeared around Lin Ming. The shield was unbreakable. At least, that was the case for now. As the divine artifact with the strongest defense, although it was now a pseudo-divine artifact, its defense could still only be broken by a god-tier powerhouse. With the attacks raining on Lin Ming right now, it was simply impossible for them to break through the defense of this shield. At this moment, the attacks in the illusory realm were chaotic and impossible to guard against. That being said, Lin Ming had the Black Tortoise, and so the attacks weren't even worthy of being considered a tickle. Tisk, tisk. Lin Ming looked at the 4 law enforcers. The cold light in his eyes made them cower a little. Their attacks were ineffective against Lin Ming, but Lin Ming's attacks on them were destructive just now. Through the overlapping reflections of the illusory realm and the such, they had witnessed just how powerful Lin Ming was. They had initially thought of suppressing Lin Ming through their attacks, thinking that he wouldn't have a chance to fight back, but now, they couldn't even break through his defense. Die! Lin Ming moved forward, and the 16 mutated seeds of flame spewed flames. Faced with this terrifying power, the 4 law enforcers who supposedly could trap Sage realm experts died on the spot. This is impossible. Within the illusory realm, a figure stood up. This was the mastermind of the illusory realm, who was also a Sage realm expert. There were 2 Sage realm experts here, and this figure was the mastermind where Lin Ming was at. The 2 Sage realm experts didn't get along well with each other, but to them, killing Lin Ming was now their top priority. I'll go. A blue figure disappeared and appeared next to Lin Ming. Be my law enforcer or die, the blue figure said coldly. Sage realm? Lin Ming didn't expect the Sage realm mage of the illusory realm to make a move so quickly. I'm asking you one last time, the Sage realm expert said coldly. Can you kill me though? Lin Ming looked at the Sage realm expert and asked innocently. Good, good. The Sage realm expert was so angry that he laughed. To think that this fellow asked him such a question. Lin Ming was asking him if he could kill him. The blue figure was a Sage realm expert, and yet he was asked such a question by a tier 10 mage. At this moment, all thoughts of being merciful were thrown out the window. Right now, he only wanted Lin Ming to find out if he could indeed kill him. Black Tortoise, Lin Ming said. A shield appeared around Lin Ming again. At the same time, more and more attacks bombarded him. In the end, cracks began to appear on the shield that surrounded Lin Ming. But ultimately, the attacks weren't able to hurt Lin Ming at all. The tombstone of the god of fire? The Sage realm expert frowned as he asked. You know quite a lot, Lin Ming smiled and said. He wasn't worried at all that the Sage realm expert would be able to injure him. After all, only a few cracks had appeared on his single-layer shield. The Black Tortoise could provide plenty of shields. You can just stay in the shield forever then. Don't ever come out. The Sage realm expert knew that this was the tombstone of the god of fire because when he had reached the Sage realm, some memory fragments had appeared in his mind. Huo! The blue figure called. I'm here, another aged voice sounded. Jewess, you can't even deal with a tier 10 mage. You really are trash. The red figure that had just appeared was called Huo, and the blue figure was called Shui. The two of them were incompatible. Right. I'm trash. Why don't you try attacking? Shui was lazy to explain, so he simply pointed at Lin Ming and suggested, the tombstone of the god of fire. Noticing the tombstone, Huo exclaimed, thanks to him being of the fire element, he had more and clearer memory fragments of the god of fire. His power is also the power of the mutated seeds of flame. Shui nodded and said, you obtained the inheritance of the god of fire? Huo frowned as he looked at Lin Ming. He knew that if he became a god-tier expert, he would be devoured by his bloodline. The only way to break this rule was to obtain the inheritance of the god of fire. However, when he had gone to the above-ground world for it, 4 Sage Realm experts had been guarding the place where the inheritance of the god of fire was. As an underworld Sage Realm expert, he couldn't force his way through. At last, with a great amount of effort, he finally managed to enter. Yet he was deemed unworthy of the inheritance of the god of fire. And now, the inheritance of the god of fire was on Lin Ming. This made Huo extremely furious. What does it have to do with you that I obtained the inheritance of the god of fire? Are you jealous? Lin Ming sneered. He wasn't afraid of them anyway. Even if the two of them joined hands, they wouldn't be able to cause him any harm. Oh right, the inheritance of the demon god is also on me, Lin Ming added. Since Huo liked to be jealous, he might as well give him another reason. What? Upon hearing Lin Ming's words, the two figures couldn't contain their shock anymore. Lin Ming actually had 2 god-tier inheritances on him. If they had even 1 god-tier inheritance, they would have a chance to escape from their current predicament. But when they looked at Lin Ming, no matter how they scrutinized him, he was only a tier 10 mage. Even if he had withstood their attacks and had nothing to fear, they believed it was all thanks to the god of fire's longevity monument. The longevity monument was the most powerful defensive divine artifact. It was only given that the two of them who were at the sage tier couldn't break through its defense. You two, just accept your fate. Lin Ming spread out his hands and said. Although he was surrounded and attacked by the two of them, Lin Ming didn't panic at all. Instead, he continued to provoke the two of them. Accept my fate. Accept my fate. After the two of them heard Lin Ming's words, they became even more furious. The blue figure roared in that instant, I won't accept my fate. The red figure also went crazy. The two of them started to go berserk on the spot due to Lin Ming's words. Their attacks were overwhelming. Countless layers of illusions were destroyed by them. If you two are jealous, so be it. You can't possibly go crazy just because you're jealous, right? Looking at the two of them, Lin Ming couldn't help but ask. Did the two of them really go crazy because of jealousy? Boom! However, the two of them didn't give him any response. Their attacks didn't stop either. On the contrary, one of the sage's attacks landed on the other sage. As the attack landed, the two of the sages started fighting each other right in front of Lin Ming. Their minds are getting messed up. Lin Ming could see clearly that chaos had begun appearing in their eyes. Sage tier experts who were at their peak usually would not cultivate to the point of going berserk or dying. It could be said that the situation unfolding now was unprecedented. After all, to be able to become a sage tier expert, one's mental fortitude had to be extremely tough, and all aspects of one's body would undergo qualitative changes. To think that the two of them were suffering a mental breakdown just because of Lin Ming's words. No! The red figure roared angrily. The inheritance of the god of fire is mine. I don't want to die in this place. Even if I cultivate with all my might, I'll only become someone else's stepping stone. After breaking through to the sage tier, the red figure understood the meaning of fate, but he didn't want to accept his fate. After all, he was, in his sense, alive. If he continued cultivating, his consciousness and the life that belonged to him would be devoured. He would only become someone else's stepping stone. It hadn't been easy for the red figure to become a sage tier expert, to become someone at the top of the world. How could he be willing to become someone else's stepping stone? Let alone a stepping stone that lost all of its consciousness. Their suppressed instincts were released due to the words Lin Ming had said when they were slacking off mentally. Lin Ming! Suddenly, the two of them turned their heads at the same time and spoke to Lin Ming. Such an eerie scene made people shudder. However, all fear came from a lack of strength, and thus Lin Ming was not worried that the two of them could hurt him at all. Come with us, The two of them spoke to Lin Ming. No, Lin Ming shook his head and refused outright. Only a fool would go with them. That being said, Lin Ming was quite curious as to how they suddenly knew his name. You don't believe me? Do you know how many people in this world are looking forward day and night to meeting me? The two of them spoke at the same time. Well, such a chance is nothing to me. Lin Ming waved his hand and said straightforwardly. Very well, but today I have chosen you. The two figures spoke at the same time. Fuse. With this, the two figures, one red and one blue, slowly fused. In the end, they became one. Lin Ming had noticed just now that the two figures were of the same height, and had exactly the same features. Thus, when they fused, there was no change at all. However, as they merged, their aura changed. Separately, the two of them were each at the pinnacle of the sage tier. Now that they had fused perfectly together, they had directly become a half-step god tier. Such strength was the strongest existence that Lin Ming had ever seen in this world. Although a half-step god tier hadn't exactly reached the god tier, it still had the word god in it. The power someone at this tier possessed was the basics of the god tier's power. Their original consciousness has been swallowed at this moment. Lin Ming frowned. He naturally knew the reason why the two of them had fused. It was also the reason why their temperaments had changed so drastically in an instant. It was because their most primitive consciousness had already been devoured. This figure didn't belong to either of them. Fine, I'll go with you. Lin Ming nodded and agreed after witnessing this scene. Let's go. The figure grabbed Lin Ming's shield and it actually made him budge. The strongest defensive divine artifact was shaken at this moment. Open! This figure shouted. With a boom, the ground rumbled. All the illusions beneath this figure disappeared. Following this, a very deep crack appeared. With its grasp on Lin Ming, the figure descended. This crack was several kilometers deep, but in the eyes of a half-step god-tier expert, this wasn't much of a distance at all. This is. As this figure stopped, a huge painting appeared in front of Lin Ming. If you look here, this is a painting, and you're merely in a painting. This figure said to Lin Ming. Everything here is just a painting. After hearing this, Lin Ming frowned. That's right. That's why everyone, no matter who it is, will be trapped here before they reach the god tier. Even god tier experts need time to get out of here. This figure nodded and said. Because this is a divine artifact, the figure continued. This divine artifact includes such a large space. After hearing this, Lin Ming frowned. There were many layers of illusions here, which made it impossible to break through. Even the nine-headed worm couldn't distinguish whether the things in this place were real or fake. This was also the reason for the cultivator's inability to escape. Why was it that even the nine-headed worm, who was extremely proficient in illusions, couldn't tell the difference? Because they were in an illusory realm, a drawing. What Lin Ming had never expected was that this place was actually a divine artifact. Of course, it wasn't surprising that a divine artifact had such large a space. After all, the first space in Lin Ming's stupa, the secret realm, was extremely vast. No ordinary person wouldn't be able to reach the ends of the space in their entire life. However, for a drawing to be the original body of a divine artifact was what made Lin Ming so surprised. That being said, how could a divine artifact be understood through its appearance? The drawing in front of him now could be said to contain unfathomable mysteries and rhymes. That's right. This isn't just any divine artifact. It's the only one that hasn't been damaged. The figure nodded and said. This is also one of the great four divine artifacts. The heaven and earth diagram, the figure continued. The heaven and earth diagram? Lin Ming was quite surprised when he heard this. He didn't expect that one of the great four divine artifacts, the heaven and earth diagram, to be here. During the war back then, the heaven and earth diagram was also damaged. However, it has repaired itself since then. The figure spoke again. A divine artifact that can self-repair? Lin Ming lowered his head. Gandalf had also been damaged back then and had now repaired one layer of himself. The other layer could only be repaired after Lin Ming advanced to the god tier. That's right. Of course, all divine artifacts have the ability to repair themselves. However, there's one thing about the heaven and earth diagram. Even if there's only one little corner of it left, it can still self-repair to its complete state. The figure nodded and said. As for the stupa and the divine tomb, they can only be repaired through external forces when they are damaged to a certain extent. This figure knew of Lin Ming's inheritance. He also knew that the stupa and the divine tomb were both damaged beyond repair. Divine tomb? Lin Ming frowned. He didn't know that Black Tortoise had another name. Are you the diagram spirit? Lin Ming lowered his head and bowed. That's right, it's me. After so many years, I can finally see the light of day again. The figure nodded and sighed. Today I'll give you this inheritance. Are you willing to accept it? The diagram spirit asked Lin Ming. Senior, since you have a new body, you should take back your things. Lin Ming waved his hand and refused. Now that the diagram spirit had awakened, even if Lin Ming begged for the diagram spirit probably wouldn't agree. After all, the heaven and earth diagram was something that belonged to the diagram spirit to begin with. In addition, the diagram spirit was different from the other gods that Lin Ming had met. The other god tier experts, such as the demon god and the god of fire, were only left with remnant souls. After they gave Lin Ming their inheritance, they had vanished into thin air. It was also because they had no chance of awakening at all that they had given their inheritance to Lin Ming with 100% certainty. With this, they could continue their lineage. However, the diagram spirit was different. He had already used the bodies of those two fellows to be reborn. The current diagram spirit completely had the ability to inherit his inheritance. Even if I obtain my inheritance now, I won't have the ability to break through that barrier. Unexpectedly, the diagram spirit shook his head. You were already at the god tier in the past. Why do you not have the ability now? Hearing this, Lin Ming didn't quite understand. At that time, the path was still there, and the magic elements were dense. There were also many opportunities, which was why I could break through to the god tier. The diagram spirit sighed and said. Of course, it was not easy as he put it. Breaking through to the god tier was no easy feat. After all, becoming a god would mean that one was the true pinnacle of the world, and it required one to sublimate from the limits of one's physical body. Right now, there's only one juncture in the entire world. The diagram spirit's gaze landed on Lin Ming. And that's you. The things that the other god tier experts could know, he, the diagram spirit, could also learn about. As long as you open up the path, it's only a matter of time before I can break through to the god tier with my current cultivation base. After all, I'll just have to walk the path I walked on before. The diagram spirit exploded with extreme confidence. Senior, won't you be able to advance further if you take your inheritance? Lin Ming asked. No one was exempt from the urge to leave all good things for themselves. Lin Ming didn't believe that the diagram spirit would be so selfless to refuse to take the inheritance that was right in front of him when it was something that would allow him to advance further. Right now, my cultivation is only at the half-step god tier. It would be a waste for me to accept the inheritance. The diagram spirit still waved his hand. You're born from the illusory realm, right? Lin Ming looked at the diagram spirit and chuckled. I've existed for so long. Now that I've regenerated my consciousness through their bodies, this can't be considered as my true body. The diagram spirit nodded. That's not what I mean. I mean, you are an illusion. Lin Ming interrupted him. Was the diagram spirit trying to deceive him? Either way, Lin Ming didn't believe him. Besides, you want me to accept the inheritance, but where is it? How can I accept it? Lin Ming asked Huazian innocently. Wheels of Wrath. Lin Ming shouted and used all his strength to ruthlessly slash at the diagram spirit. Kid, you're quite good. The diagram spirit looked at Lin Ming and smiled coldly. The power of the Wheels of Wrath was blocked by the drawing. If you were able to activate all the power of the Wheels of Wrath, I wouldn't have been able to block it. However, you're only at tier 10 now, so you definitely won't be able to do so. The diagram spirit raised his hand, and the Wheels of Wrath returned to Lin Ming's hand. I'm indeed an illusion. You've passed the first trial, the diagram spirit said and grabbed Lin Ming once more. Go, the second trial is waiting. The diagram spirit grabbed Lin Ming's shield and threw him into the drawing. With this, Lin Ming was now inside the heaven and earth diagram. Here, if not for Lin Ming's knowledge, he wouldn't have been able to tell that this was a world within a drawing. It was simply too real. It was so real that one couldn't distinguish real from fake at all. This was the highest tier of illusory realms. The illusory realm that could trap a sage to death was far inferior to the heaven and earth diagram. However, the problem Lin Ming faced was also apparent. The illusory realm outside was far from the heaven and earth diagram, yet it could trap even a sage to death. Now that they were inside the heaven and earth diagram itself, the difficulty was needless to say. Gandalf, are you familiar with the heaven and earth diagram? Lin Ming asked. Yes, I know a little about it. At your current tier, Master, you will need to find the heaven and earth brush to free yourself from the heaven and earth diagram. Gandalf appeared, nodded and said. Gandalf had existed for a long time, thus he knew quite some things. Added by the fact they were both a part of the Great Four divine artifacts from the same period, thus it was only a given he knew a lot about the matters within the heaven and earth diagram. The heaven and earth brush? Hearing this name, Lin Ming frowned. The heaven and earth brush came with the heaven and earth diagram? That's right. The heaven and earth brush has absolute control over everything in the heaven and earth diagram. On top of that, it can create anything and everything in the heaven and earth diagram. Gandalf nodded and said, It can create anything? Lin Ming now understood the relationship between the heaven and earth brush and the heaven and earth diagram. Then, if you created something but you don't want it anymore, is it impossible to erase them? Lin Ming asked. No, the heaven and earth brush can create anything in the heaven and earth diagram. Similarly, it can also erase anything. For example, the mountains and rivers here. If you don't want them anymore, you only need to gently erase them with the brush and they will disappear. Gandalf shook his head and said, Got it. Lin Ming nodded. The heaven and earth diagram was like a piece of paper, and the heaven and earth brush was like a pencil with an eraser. Now, our target is to get the heaven and earth brush. Lin Ming lowered his head and said, But I don't think anyone would put the heaven and earth brush here, right? After all, no one would lock the key in the room, unless that someone had amnesia. You don't have to think too much about all that. The second trial requires you to find the heaven and earth brush, so it's definitely in the diagram. The figure from before appeared beside Lin Ming and said, Can you give me a hint? Lin Ming asked. The area is so small, yet you still want to give me a hint. How greedy. After hearing Lin Ming's words, the figure said coldly. Fine, Lin Ming nodded. Hearing the diagram spirit's words, he knew that he wouldn't give him a hint. The heaven and earth diagram was even more vast than the secret realm in the first level of the stupa. Though, your body is so real right now. I really can't confirm whether you are in an illusion or not. Lin Ming turned his head, glanced at the diagram spirit, and said, I'm a real existence. It's just that you're the juncture, the figure said. All right, Lin Ming nodded obediently. Either way, it wouldn't do him any help to think too much about whether the diagram spirit was real or an illusion. After all, some techniques of the god-tier experts were still impossible for Lin Ming to figure out at this point. That being said, Lin Ming believed that he was in no danger. If the diagram spirit wanted to make a move, he would be able to succeed anyway, regardless of whether he was an illusion or not. Moreover, Lin Ming was currently within the heaven and earth drawing. Buzz. Lin Ming opened up all of his consciousness. The consciousness in Lin Ming's brain was no longer plain. It could be said to be spiritual consciousness. This was because Lin Ming's consciousness had already exceeded the range of plain consciousness. Even some of the sage-tier experts hadn't reached such a state yet. For example, the underworld sage-tier magical beast had an extremely powerful body but a much weaker consciousness. There were also saga-tier berserkers who hadn't reached such a state yet. However, it wasn't very strange that Lin Ming's consciousness had evolved to be spiritual consciousness. After all, his consciousness had undergone so many reincarnations and had been tempered by the mutated seed of flame that was ranked first. When Lin Ming became a god-tier expert, his consciousness would evolve to become divine consciousness. At that time, the world would probably be under his control. And now, given the size of the heaven and earth diagram and Lin Ming's spiritual consciousness, he didn't have a problem covering the entirety of the diagram with his spiritual consciousness. As Lin Ming completely covered the diagram with his spiritual consciousness, even the diagram spirit was quite surprised. No wonder Lin Ming could dispel his bewitching moves in an instant just now. It turned out that this kid, Lin Ming, had evolved his consciousness to be a spiritual consciousness. If that was the case, then it was no strange occurrence that Lin Ming was able to do as such. Senior, can I be by myself for a while? Lin Ming turned around and asked the diagram spirit innocently. Sure, fine. It's up to you. Anyway, it's your trial, not mine. After the diagram spirit heard Lin Ming's words, he nodded and said, Thank you for your understanding, Senior. Lin Ming bowed and said, There are tens of thousands of worlds, but there's only one exit. Lin Ming closed his eyes. Longevity Monument. Lin Ming said. The Longevity Monument was also known as the Divine Tomb, but Lin Ming was more used to calling it the Longevity Monument. Master. Black Tortoise's figure appeared in front of Lin Ming. Go and try resisting the water currents here and see if they're real, Lin Ming said to Black Tortoise. Master, there's no need for me to do that. Everything here, the water currents and so on, are all real. Black Tortoise lowered his head and said, Everything's real? Everything here, Lin Ming frowned. As a divine artifact, the space that the heaven and earth diagram had was, to say the least, real. Just like the secret realm and the lightning pool in the stupa, they were all real as well. However, it was known that everything in the heaven and earth diagram could be created out of thin air. That being said, everything that was created out of thin air in the heaven and earth diagram was real. This was the true mystery of the heaven and earth diagram. It was also why the heaven and earth diagram could become one of the great four divine artifacts just with one drawing. One thing to note, Master, is that the flowing water here can turn into stones and the stones can turn into animals. Everything can be changed at will. But still, everything is real, Black Tortoise continued. Got it. Lin Ming nodded. I understand what you mean. The heaven and earth brush might be a stone, a stream of water, or even an animal, right? Lin Ming said. Yes, Master. Black Tortoise nodded and said. Lin Ming closed his eyes. If that was the case, the difficulty could be said to be too high. Perhaps the withered grass under Lin Ming's butt was the heaven and earth brush. I have a bold idea. Lin Ming opened his eyes and said. Since it's both illusory and real, and can be erased and created, why shouldn't I just destroy it all? Lin Ming stood up and said. Mutated seeds of flame, come. Lin Ming ordered and the 16 types of mutated seeds of flame shot out. Lin Ming's power burned the place. This is an option? A voice in the dark said in surprise. This was simply hooliganism. It's useless, another voice said. If the heaven and earth diagram could be destroyed so easily and the heaven and earth brush could be found so easily, I'm afraid we would have found it long ago. This voice continued. He felt that Lin Ming's method was a little too childish.